was driving west through the hill country when the sky began to turn the color of old bruises, that deep purple gray that makes the road seem narrower and the world smaller. County Road 412 wasn't on my original route, but the GPS said it would shave 15 minutes off the trip to Kerrville. I was tired, the kind of tired that turns the steering wheel into a weight. So when I saw the little wooden Airbnb sign nailed to a post that read, "The Whitmore House, vacancy tonight," I slowed down without thinking twice. The gravel road wound through cedar trees that leaned toward the headlights like they wanted to whisper something. The house appeared out of the dusk as a 2-story farmhouse, white paint peeling in sheets, front porch sagging. The listing had said rustic charm, but it looked abandoned. Still, I needed a bed and the place was unlocked, just like the check-in message said it would be. The air inside smelled faintly of lemon cleaner and old smoke. I set my bag by the couch and found the light switch. The bulbs flickered once before settling into a weak yellow glow. There was a note on the kitchen counter written in neat cursive. "Welcome, Jacob. Make yourself at home. The guest book is on the coffee table. Please sign before you leave." The host's name was Ruth, and below that was a number that looked more like an old landline than a cell phone. I didn't think much of it then. The guest book was thick, leather-bound, the kind of thing you'd find in a bed and breakfast, not a roadside rental. The pages were filled with familiar entries, couples thanking Ruth for her hospitality, solo travelers praising the quiet nights. But halfway through, I noticed something strange. One page stood out because every entry on it was dated June 14th. The first was from 1993, the next from 2003, then 2013. Each message was short and written by different hands, but all said nearly the same thing: "Do not stay past midnight." I laughed softly and shook my head. Probably some inside joke passed along by guests. Still, when I checked my phone, it was already 11:12. I turned on the small radio by the window, hoping for some local station to fill the silence. Only static came through. Outside, a wind picked up, pushing the trees into restless motion. The house groaned with the kind of noises that come from age, pipes settling, wood expanding. But after a while, I noticed something else. The sound of footsteps upstairs. Slow, dragging like someone in slippers. I froze and listened. They stopped the moment I did. I told myself there could be an animal in the attic, a raccoon maybe. I went to the bottom of the staircase and called out, "Hello? Is someone here?" Nothing. The silence stretched so long it started to hum in my ears. I climbed halfway up the stairs and the air grew colder. The light switch didn't work, so I used my phone flashlight. Dust floated in the beam like ash. At the top of the stairs, the hallway split left and right. I chose left and stepped softly, each board creaking under me. The first door opened to a small bedroom. Empty except for a rocking chair by the window facing the road. The chair moved slightly, though there was no draft. I told myself I was imagining it, closed the door, and turned back. That's when I noticed something on the floorboards. A faint dark streak like something had been dragged from one end of the hall to the other. I followed it, half angry at my own curiosity, until I reached a second door at the end. It was locked, old brass handle cold under my hand. The footsteps above me returned then, this time quicker, lighter. My heart slammed against my ribs. There couldn't be an upstairs above this floor. I'd seen the roofline from outside. I backed away and went down the stairs 2 at a time. The radio had switched off on its own. I tried my phone again, but it had no signal. The screen froze on the clock, 11:58. The seconds hand wasn't moving. When the first knock came, it was soft. 3 taps on the front door. I froze, staring at the wood, expecting another. Then again, 3 more, harder this time. I called out, "Who's there?" But the wind swallowed my voice. I stepped closer, peering through the small window. No one was there. The doorknob twitched, just slightly. I stumbled back, tripping over my bag. When I looked again, the door was wide open. The night outside was thick and black, but I could hear breathing. Slow, uneven, not mine. I slammed the door shut and shoved the bolt in place. Then the radio flicked on by itself. The static had changed into a voice. A woman's voice, cracked and far away, whispering, "You should have left before midnight." My skin went cold. I grabbed my car keys, but when I turned toward the window, the headlights outside flashed once on their own. I hadn't touched the car. I ran out the back door into the trees, not stopping until the house was out of sight. I stayed in the woods until the sky turned pale gray, then walked back shivering. The front door hung open again. Inside, everything looked the same except the guest book. It was open on the coffee table to a fresh page. A pen rested beside it. My name was already written there in neat, unfamiliar handwriting. The date beside it was June 14th, 2023. I left without touching anything else, drove until my phone got signal, and booked another room 2 towns away. That night I couldn't sleep. I searched online for the Whitmore House, County Road 412, and found an old real estate listing. The property had been condemned after a fire in 2013. The description mentioned one confirmed fatality. The owner, a woman named Ruth. Every now and then, out of morbid curiosity, I check the Airbnb app. The listing still appears, sometimes for a day or two before vanishing again. Same photos, same price, same message at the bottom of the description. The guest book is on the table. Please sign before you leave. When I booked the cabin near Lake Whitney, it had 5 stars on every platform. The reviews praised its quiet woods, the comfort of the bed, and how peaceful the nights were. That's what sold me. Peace. I'd been working night shifts for months, my sleep schedule wrecked, and I wanted somewhere silent, surrounded by nothing but pine and sky. The listing called it the Larkspur Cabin, a cozy single-story retreat. There were photos of 1 floor, 1 bedroom, 1 bathroom, all done up in rustic decor. Nothing fancy but clean. The kind of place you could imagine a writer disappearing into for a few days to recharge. When I arrived, the host had already left the key under a rock by the steps, just like the message said. The cabin sat at the edge of a gravel drive, trees hemming it in from every side. The sun was low, throwing the woods into that orange half-light that makes everything look still and watchful. Inside, it smelled faintly of pine and cleaning spray. Everything looked exactly like the pictures. Plaid blankets, a little kitchenette, a stone fireplace. I walked through, flipping on lights, checking corners out of habit. There was no second floor, just vaulted ceilings over the living room and exposed beams running across the length of the roof. I unpacked, cooked some eggs, and sat by the window while dusk sank into the trees. The quiet was heavy but comforting, at least until the first night. I went to bed around 11, leaving the windows cracked to let in the cool air. Sometime after midnight, I woke up to the sound of slow, deliberate footsteps pacing above me, not on the roof, directly over the bedroom ceiling. I lay still, eyes open, heart starting to beat faster. The sound was rhythmic, steady, like someone walking from one end of the room to the other and back again. The thing was, there was no upstairs. I'd seen every inch of the place. My first thought was raccoons or maybe a squirrel trapped in the attic space, but the steps were too heavy for that. They had weight, like boots on wooden planks. I turned on the bedside lamp and listened. The footsteps stopped. The air felt colder suddenly, and I could hear my own pulse in my ears. I told myself it was just my imagination, maybe part of a dream bleeding into wakefulness. I switched off the light and forced myself back to sleep. The next morning I looked for an attic hatch or ladder, but there wasn't one. The ceiling beams were solid and unbroken, and the roof above them had no crawl space. I spent the day hiking by the lake, trying not to think about it. By the time I got back, the wind had picked up, rattling the trees. I made some tea, sat on the couch, and decided to read through the guest book that sat on the coffee table. The cover was faux leather with Larkspur Cabin embossed in gold. Most entries were short, cheerful messages. Love the stay. Perfect weekend getaway. But a few near the end caught my attention. One from 2013. Beautiful cabin but couldn't sleep. Footsteps above the bed all night. Still gave 5 stars. Another from 2003. Great stay except for the noises upstairs. Maybe squirrels? Anyway, thanks. The handwriting was different. The dates 10 years apart almost to the day. And another from 1993. Wonderful hosts, though I'd suggest checking the attic for raccoons. The pacing sound kept us up. I flipped back further, 1983, same thing. Each 10 years, almost exactly, someone mentioned footsteps above the ceiling. All of them still gave 5 stars. That night I couldn't stop thinking about it. Around midnight the same pattern began. Slow, deliberate steps back and forth right over me. I sat up this time wide awake, staring at the ceiling. The boards creaked in perfect rhythm like someone pacing in frustration. I whispered, "Hello?" without really meaning to. The steps stopped immediately. The silence that followed felt alive. like the air itself was holding its breath. Then just as I began to lie back down, there was a single step, closer, heavier, right above the head of the bed. I turned on the lamp and stayed awake until dawn. The next morning I drove into town and found the only diner open that early. The waitress looked surprised when I mentioned the cabin. "Larkspur? That old place is still renting?" she said, pouring coffee. I told her about the noise and she just nodded slowly. "You're not the first. My uncle stayed there back in the 80s. Said he heard someone walking around all night. Owner back then tore up the roof looking for animals. Never found a thing. Folks say it's just the board settling." She smirked at that last part like even she didn't believe it. I thought about leaving, but I'd paid for 2 more nights and something about the mystery made me want to understand it. I drove back that afternoon, determined to find the cause. I brought a ladder from the shed outside and inspected the roof. It was solid. No gaps, no holes, no way anything could crawl in. I checked every corner of the ceiling inside. Nothing. When night came, I lay in bed with my phone recording audio, hoping to capture proof. Sure enough, around 12:17, the footsteps began again. The pacing was steady at first, then faster, almost agitated. I sat up and called out, "I can hear you." The steps stopped. Then after a pause, a faint scraping sound, like nails dragging across wood, moved slowly across the ceiling. I bolted upright, staring at the spot above me. The boards didn't move, but I could swear I saw a shadow shifting in the lines between them, darker than the rest of the room. I played the recording the next morning. The sound was faint, but there, steps, then a dragging noise. But as the file played, something else became clear. Before the pacing started, there was a whisper, barely audible but unmistakably human. It said, "You're late." I nearly dropped the phone. I replayed it 3 times. Same phrase. Each word stretched like it came from a mouth too dry to form them cleanly. That day I went back to the guest book. I looked again at the old entries, comparing the dates. Each one was almost exactly 10 years apart. 1983, 1993, 2003, 2013. The current year was 2023. 10 years since the last mention. My stomach sank. I flipped to the back where the last page was blank and realized what the pattern meant. Whatever happened in that cabin, it repeated on a cycle. Maybe someone had died there, maybe something else, but every 10 years the footsteps returned. Every guest heard them, and they all still left 5 stars like something compelled them to. That night I didn't plan to sleep. I set up my phone again, lights off, sitting up in bed. The forest outside was silent except for the wind. When the clock hit midnight, the first step sounded. Then another. I whispered, "What do you want?" The pacing stopped. Then a voice, dry and low, from directly above. "Your turn." I froze, unable to move. The ceiling creaked once more and dust drifted down from the beam above me. Slowly, a dark stain began to spread along the wood grain, the shape of a bare foot pressing from the other side. Another followed, closer to the bed. I scrambled up, heart pounding, and ran for the door. When I reached it, the knob refused to turn, like someone held it from the other side. Behind me, the steps moved down the hall, coming closer. I don't remember opening the door. I just remember being outside, running through the trees, not stopping until I reached my car. When I finally looked back, the cabin's lights flickered in and out like the whole place was breathing. I drove until sunrise and didn't go back. A week later, I checked the listing. It was still up. Still 5 stars. A new review had just been posted. "Wonderful stay, so peaceful. Loved the quiet nights. Did hear something walking upstairs, but must be the wind. 5 stars. The date was October 3rd, 2033, exactly 10 years from now. In Junction, Texas, there's a narrow road that curls off Highway 377, past a dying pecan grove and a weathered "for sale" sign that's been leaning in the same ditch since before the pandemic. The road ends at a small single-story house, white with faded blue trim, a porch sagging at the center, and a mailbox that reads H. Lantry. Locals call it the Lantry Place, though no one in town has seen Harold Lantry in years. He was the old man who built that cabin after his wife died in the 80s, but folks say he packed up for Lubbock a decade ago. What's strange is that the place never stayed empty. Travelers, mostly people passing through on long drives, started showing up there again. They said they'd booked it online. A cozy Airbnb listing called Hill Country Retreat 1313. The host was listed as Harold, and the reviews were glowing. Guests mentioned peace, quiet, clean rooms, even cookies on the counter. But every few weeks, another car would be found at the property days later, dusted with road grit, keys still in the ignition, luggage untouched. The sheriff's reports always said no foul play suspected, but there was never a clear sign of where the guests went. Harold Lantry swears he never made that listing. He's told anyone who'll listen that he sold the place years ago to some out-of-state buyer. Cash deal, no questions asked. Yet when deputies tracked down the supposed buyer, the name on the deed didn't exist. That's when the town started whispering again. Stories of the old Lantry house being haunted or cursed or something worse. I know because I was one of the idiots who booked it. It was last March on a Friday evening. I was driving from Austin to El Paso for work and wanted a cheap place to crash halfway through. The listing popped up right away when I filtered by quiet countryside stays. It had a single photo, a bright, warm living room with an old brick fireplace, and the description sounded like something my mother would write. Welcome home to Hill Country Peace. Your code is 1313. I remember thinking it was odd that the check-in instructions were printed right there in the public description, but I was tired and didn't care. When I arrived, the sun was melting behind the pecan trees and the place looked exactly like the photo. Porch light on, curtains drawn, a small sign on the door that read Welcome Guests. The keypad was dusty but worked. I punched in 1313 and the deadbolt clicked open with a satisfying snap. The inside smelled faintly of lemon cleaner and something older, like wallpaper glue and dust. The lights flickered once when I switched them on. There were 2 rooms, a small kitchen with a gas stove and a bedroom with a brass bed frame. Someone had left folded towels on the bed, a note that said enjoy your stay, and sure enough, a plate of cookies on the counter, wrapped in cellophane. For the first few hours it was peaceful. I heated up some coffee, wrote a few work emails, and sat on the porch with my phone scrolling through local news. That's when I noticed the reviews again. One of them was dated 2 days earlier. Lovely stay, it read. The host was kind and helpful. We'll be back soon. The username was just a string of numbers and the profile had no photo. Another review from a week before said, strange noises at night but still charming. I tried clicking the host profile but it wouldn't load. The site glitched, then booted me back to the main search page. Around 10 I heard footsteps. They were soft, deliberate, coming from above me. That startled me at first because the place was single-story. I stood in the middle of the kitchen, staring at the ceiling, and the steps moved slowly from one end of the house to the other, like someone pacing. Then they stopped. The house went quiet again, except for the hum of the refrigerator. I told myself it was raccoons or old plumbing. But when I looked outside, there were no trees touching the roof, no signs of animals. I decided to lock the door and sleep. The moment I switched off the lamp, though, I heard it again. Step, 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 exactly above my bed. I turned the light back on, heart pounding. I climbed up onto the counter, pushed open the attic hatch, and shined my phone light inside. It was empty except for dust, a few boards, and insulation. But then I noticed something odd. The boards were newer toward the center, like someone had replaced a section of the floor. There was also a smell coming from up there, something sour and faintly sweet, like fruit left too long in a drawer. That's when the light from my phone flickered. For a split second, I thought I saw the outline of something crouched by the far wall, pale, almost human-shaped. But when I blinked, it was gone. I climbed down fast, slammed the hatch shut, and sat on the floor trying to calm myself. I checked my phone for signal. Nothing. 0 bars. The Wi-Fi password on the counter didn't connect to anything either. I told myself I'd just drive back to town, but when I went outside, my rental car wouldn't start. The lights came on, but the ignition made only a dry clicking sound. Then I noticed something in the gravel driveway. There were tire marks, 2 sets of them, that led straight into the trees and stopped as if the cars had vanished halfway down the path. The footsteps started again while I stood there. Only this time they weren't above me. They were behind me, inside the house. Slow, measured steps moving from the kitchen to the bedroom. I didn't go back inside. I sat in my car with the doors locked until dawn, shivering, half expecting someone to knock on the window. But no one did. At sunrise, my phone suddenly had service again. I called the sheriff's office, explained what happened, and they sent a deputy. He checked the house, found nothing. He told me the property had been empty for years, no electricity, no running water. He showed me a photo on his phone, same address, same porch, but in his picture the windows were boarded up, the siding half rotten, weeds chest high. When I showed him my Airbnb confirmation email, the picture in it had changed. It was now that same boarded up shell. No fireplace, no cookies, no host name, just the listing title, a check-in code 1313. They towed my rental car back to Junction and told me to get some rest. But that night I logged back into Airbnb to see if the listing was still there. It was live again with a new set of reviews. The most recent one said, "Perfect weekend. Harold was very kind." I called the sheriff the next day to tell him, but he said something that froze me. "That's not possible," he said. "We tore that house down last night." He paused for a long time before adding, "But you're not the first one to call about that place. Every few months," he said, "someone reports the same thing. A fresh Airbnb listing. Same code, same photo, always popping up for a few days before disappearing again. They've traced the IPs, subpoenaed Airbnb, nothing. The system shows no record of the listing ever existing. It's been months since then, but sometimes I still check the site late at night. The listing always comes back, usually on weekends, and the reviews keep growing. Different names, all glowing. Last Friday I saw a new review posted under the name C. Taylor. That's my name. It said, "Wonderful stay. The host made me feel right at home." The timestamp was 12:07 a.m. I was awake when it went live. I hadn't written it. And when I clicked the link, it didn't show the Lantry house anymore. It showed a picture of my apartment door. The caption read, "Your code is 1313. Late-night laundry cycles were nothing new at the Junction Inn. Travelers came through at all hours. Truckers, night nurses, families running late on cross-country trips. The hum of the old washer in the motel's laundry room was as much a part of the building's soundscape as the cicadas outside or the rattle of trucks on Highway 377, but the problem started when the machine began running on its own. At first, the owner, a man named Ray, assumed it was just the timer malfunctioning. The washer was nearly 20 years old, a bulky white Maytag with yellowing buttons and a stubborn lid that had to be slammed twice before it latched. The first guest to mention it had come down to the office at 2 in the morning, asking why the machine had started up again after he'd finished his load. Ray had shrugged, told him it was on its last legs. The next night, another guest said the same thing. Then another. By the 5th complaint, Ray started checking it himself. He'd unplugged it once and come back a few hours later to find it churning away, full of water and soap, even though the cord was still draped over the counter. He stood there watching the drum twist, the lid vibrating slightly with each rotation. A faint tapping sound coming from inside, like fingernails against metal. When he lifted the lid, the machine froze mid-cycle, silent and still. The water was gray and cold, full of lint and something that looked like strands of dark hair. He drained it, wiped the inside clean, and unplugged it again. The next morning it was running. Ray stopped using the laundry room after that. He locked the door and told guests it was under maintenance. But one of them, a woman traveling from Dallas, must have found the spare key he kept under the snack machine, because she went in anyway. Her name was Lila. She'd been staying at the Junction Inn for 3 nights while visiting her sister in Mason. On the 4th night, around 11, she texted her sister that she was doing laundry before checking out in the morning. Her sister replied, telling her to get some rest. That was the last message she ever sent. Ray found her car still parked outside her room the next day. The cleaning lady said the bed hadn't been slept in, but the door was locked from the inside. Her purse and phone were on the nightstand. No one found her until late afternoon, when Ray finally broke into the laundry room because of the smell. She was sitting on the floor beside the washer, her back against the wall, her hands still wet and wrinkled as if she'd been reaching into water for a long time. Her eyes were open, staring toward the corner, where the shadows seemed thicker than they should have been. The washer lid was closed, water dripping down the sides, the faint scent of detergent hanging in the air. The sheriff said there was no sign of struggle. No wounds, no forced entry. It looked like she'd simply sat there and died. But the washer, well, that was the strange part. It was full of water again, and inside were her clothes folded neatly, bone dry, and on top of them was something else. A white nightgown, the kind women used to wear half a century ago, embroidered with faded blue flowers. It was soaked and cold, and when one of the deputies lifted it out, a clump of dark hair fell into the water. Not short hair like Lila's, It was long, tangled, and black, the strands clinging to the sides of the drum like seaweed. They sent everything to the lab in San Angelo. The results came back with no explanation. The hair belonged to a woman in her 20s, but the DNA didn't match anyone in the system. After the investigation, Ray drained the washer again, wiped it down, and locked the room for good. He even nailed the door shut. But 2 weeks later, one of the guests complained to the front desk about a noise in the walls, a low, rhythmic thumping that came and went every few seconds. When Ray went to check, he followed the sound to the laundry room. The door was still nailed shut, but the air coming through the cracks was damp and warm, carrying the faint smell of detergent and wet linen. That night he heard it again, the washer's distinct cycle, the same heavy slosh and spin. He tried to ignore it, but curiosity got the better of him. Just before sunrise, he pried the nails loose and opened the door. The floor was wet. The washer was running again. He stood there in silence, the only light coming from the hallway bulb flickering behind him. The machine's lid rattled with each rotation. He could hear something inside, something heavier than clothes. Each time the drum turned, there was a dull, soft thud. Ray reached out and lifted the lid. The machine stopped mid-cycle, but the drum continued to spin for a second, slowly coming to rest. Inside was a pool of soapy water. Floating near the surface was something pale. He leaned closer, squinting, then stumbled back, his breath catching in his throat. It was a hand. Small and colorless, its fingers slightly curled as if reaching for something. The wrist ended cleanly. No blood, no torn flesh, just smooth, unnatural white like porcelain. The hand sank slowly until it disappeared into the gray water. When the sheriff arrived, the washer was empty again. No hand, no water, just the faint smell of bleach and old fabric. They said Ray was tired, that his mind was playing tricks on him. Maybe he'd fallen asleep on his feet and dreamed it. But the next morning, a new guest checked in, a young man heading west for work. That night he went down to the laundry room. He never checked out. By dawn, Ray found the door open, the washer lid closed, water dripping down the sides just like before. He stood there for a long time before walking to the office and taking the vacancy sign out of the window. A month later, the Junction Inn was closed. The building still stands on the edge of town, the sign out front half buried in weeds. People say they've seen the lights flicker at night, and if you get close enough, you can hear the steady hum of a washing machine running somewhere inside. Locals say if you ever open it, you'll find what she was trying to wash away. It was a late Friday evening when Kara and Miguel pulled into the gravel drive of the Little River cabin off FM 170, just outside of Lajitas. The desert around them was quiet except for the faint rustle of wind moving through the brush and the low hum of the Rio Grande, a few hundred feet behind the cabin. They'd booked the place online, a cheap weekend getaway spot that promised stargazing, fishing, and privacy. The ad had mentioned no Wi-Fi, no service, no neighbors, just peace. That was exactly what they wanted after weeks of work and noise and traffic back in San Antonio. The cabin was small, one room with a kitchenette and a bed facing a big sliding glass door that opened toward the river. The air smelled faintly of cedar and dust. There was a guest book on the counter with names and short notes, couples from all over Texas who had stayed, some mentioning the beautiful sunsets, others talking about how quiet the nights were. They unpacked, grilled some burgers on the porch, and watched the sun sink behind the low hills of Mexico across the water. By the time night settled in, the sky was wide and black, heavy with stars. The air turned cold fast. Inside, the only light came from a single bulb over the kitchen sink and the blinking green light of the mini fridge. Kara fell asleep first, curled up under the quilt, her phone on the nightstand. Miguel stayed up reading a paperback, half distracted by the creaks of the cabin and the sound of crickets outside. At some point, he must have drifted off because the next thing he remembered was the sound of water, something dripping steadily. He looked around in the dark, confused, before realizing it was the sound of the old bathroom sink dripping. The clock on his phone said 3:14 a.m. He plugged it in to charge, rolled over, and went back to sleep. In the morning, sunlight streamed through the glass doors, cutting across the bed. Kara was sitting up, frowning down at her phone. Miguel blinked, groggy. She didn't say anything at first, just handed it to him. The photo gallery was open. The most recent image showed both of them asleep in the bed, taken from the foot of it. The next one was from the side, then from above. The angles were slightly different in each. Hundreds of photos, all from the same night. Each time stamped every few minutes from 12 a.m. to 5:47 a.m. Miguel stared at them, trying to make sense of it. "You must have left your camera on," he said weakly. Kara shook her head. "No, I didn't take these. Look at the angle. Someone was standing there." Her voice was trembling now. He checked his phone too, and his stomach dropped. His gallery was the same. Hundreds of photos, different angles. In some, their eyes were barely open, as if the flash had disturbed them but not woken them. In one, Miguel could see the faint reflection of a person in the window behind the bed, a shape, tall and thin, standing between them and the river outside. They tore through the cabin looking for any sign of intrusion. The door was locked from the inside. The windows too. No footprints outside except their own. The porch light had burned out sometime during the night. When they went down to the edge of the river, they noticed something strange. The dirt near the bank was smoothed over like someone had dragged a broom across it. They packed up fast. By the time the car hit the highway, Kara was crying quietly, staring straight ahead. Miguel tried to call the owner, but there was no service. The signal didn't come back until they were halfway to Presidio. When he finally reached the number from the booking confirmation, a man answered. "This is Miguel Ramirez. We stayed at your river cabin on FM 170. I need to report something." The man paused. "You must have the wrong place," he said. "I sold that property last year. Nobody's renting it anymore." Miguel pulled the phone away, checked the number, and read it back. "This is the number from the listing. I told the site to take it down months ago. Somebody must have copied the ad." Kara leaned close to the phone. "But we paid. We stayed there last night. The key was in a lockbox." The man was silent for a moment. When he spoke again, his voice had dropped to a whisper. "You said you stayed there last night?" "Yes." He let out a slow, unsteady breath. "That cabin hasn't had power or water in almost a year. The flood last spring wiped out the line. You couldn't have stayed there." Miguel's hand tightened around the phone. "I'm telling you, the lights worked. The fridge, everything." The man didn't respond. Then he said, "Listen, I don't know who you are, but I'd delete whatever's on your phone. And don't go back there." The line went dead. When they pulled into a diner in Presidio, Kara went straight to the restroom. Miguel opened his photo gallery again. He deleted the pictures one by one, his hands shaking. But when he closed the app and opened it again, the photos were back, this time with a few new ones added. They weren't of the cabin anymore. They were of the car, taken from behind the back seat. The first few showed them driving. Then one showed Kara asleep with her head against the window. The last one showed Miguel looking down at his phone exactly as he was doing now. The timestamp said 10:14 a.m., 2 minutes ago. He dropped the phone. When Kara came back out, he didn't tell her. They just drove. They didn't talk until they reached Marfa that evening. She asked if he'd called the police yet. He shook his head. The cell service had gone in and out all day. Every time he tried, the call wouldn't connect. That night, they checked into a motel near the edge of town. Miguel put both phones in the bathroom sink and covered them with a towel. Kara fell asleep with the TV on. He sat by the window staring at the parking lot. It was quiet except for a stray dog padding across the asphalt. Just after midnight, the TV flickered. The static screen went black for a second, then showed something else. Grainy footage like a live feed from a phone camera. The angle was low, looking through a cracked window. Miguel leaned closer. The screen showed the motel parking lot, the same one right outside. Then it slowly tilted up toward their window. He turned off the TV, heart pounding. In the silence that followed, he thought he heard it. The faint click of a phone camera from somewhere in the dark. When the police arrived the next morning, the phones were gone. So were Kara's clothes, the car keys, and the lockbox key from the cabin. Miguel swore he'd seen her only minutes earlier. In the bathroom, brushing her hair. The door was closed. When they forced it open, it was empty. They searched the room, the parking lot, the desert for miles. No sign of her. 3 days later, the motel clerk called the sheriff's office. She'd gone to clean the room and found a single phone on the nightstand. It was Miguel's. The gallery contained over 2,000 photos. Every one of them showed the same image. Kara asleep beside the river, her face turned toward the camera, eyes slightly open. Each picture was taken 1 minute apart. The final image showed the cabin door standing open, moonlight on the river beyond it, and the faint outline of someone standing just inside, holding the phone. The listing didn't have any reviews yet, but the photos looked nice. A small house outside Careville, tucked among the live oaks with a gravel driveway and a porch swing. The host's name was Gordon. His profile picture showed a smiling, balding man in his 50s wearing a brown sweater. The price was low, the reviews non-existent, and the description said, "New listing. Be my first guest." I was driving from El Paso to Austin for a freelance photography job and wanted to stop somewhere quiet for the night. It was late, nearly 9 when I booked it. Gordon messaged within minutes. "Welcome, Jonathan. The door will be unlocked. Enjoy your stay. No key code, no check-in hassle." I figured he was one of those small-town hosts who trusted people by instinct. By the time I got there, it was close to midnight. The road turned to gravel about 2 miles before the pin on the map. It was that part of Texas where every shadow looks like a deer, and the silence presses against the windows. The house appeared after a bend, a one-story ranch-style cabin, faint light glowing through the curtains. I parked beside a weathered Chevy truck that looked like it hadn't moved in years. The porch creaked when I stepped onto it, and the door opened easily, just as he said. The first thing that hit me was the smell. Not bad, just old. Cedar wood and something faintly metallic like rust or dried rain. The place was clean enough. A couch, a coffee table, a kitchenette, and photos. They were everywhere. On every wall, every corner, even lining the hallway. All black and white portraits, professionally shot, maybe from the 1950s. Each one showed the same man. A middle-aged guy sitting on a wooden chair in front of a blank wall, wearing a button-down shirt and a slight fixed smile. The man in the photos looked eerily like the host's profile picture, only younger. The same receding hairline, same soft eyes, same half-smile. The odd part wasn't that he was in every picture, it was that his pose never changed. Same position, same lighting, but in each picture he was older. Some photos yellowed, others crisp and recent. It was like a time-lapse of the same man aging decade by decade, but never leaving that chair. I told myself it was an art project. Maybe Gordon was a photographer or collector. Still, I felt uneasy as I set my bag down in the bedroom. The bed was neatly made, a folded note on the pillow. "Welcome, Jonathan. Please leave a review when you can. It helps more than you think." I smiled at the courtesy, tossed the note on the nightstand, and went to shower. The bathroom mirror was slightly fogged, the kind that distorts your reflection just enough to make you look like someone else for a second. I remember thinking that the lighting in there was off. Too yellow, almost like candlelight, even though the bulb was modern. After I showered, I scrolled through my phone, but the signal was weak. No Wi-Fi network showed up either, even though the listing claimed it had one. I thought about calling Gordon, but his number wasn't listed, only the Airbnb chat. It didn't matter. I was tired enough to fall asleep instantly. Around 2 a.m., a noise woke me up. A click, like an old camera shutter. Then another. I sat up, listening. Silence, maybe an animal outside or the house settling. I reached for my phone, no signal, no bars. I remember thinking about those photos again, wondering why anyone would fill their home with hundreds of pictures of themselves. I eventually fell back asleep. When I woke the next morning, sunlight was pouring through the blinds. Everything looked normal, until I checked my phone. The battery had drained to 10%, but what made my stomach twist was the gallery icon showing over 200 new photos. I opened it. Every single image was of me sleeping. Same angle, same framing. My body turned slightly from one to the next. Proof they'd been taken seconds apart through the night. I was under the covers, face half lit by the window glow. In one, my eyes were half open. The timestamp read 2:03 a.m. The last photo was blank white, like a flash went off too close to the lens. I jumped out of bed, heart hammering. The windows were locked, but the faint outline of shoe prints marked the dust by the nightstand. I checked the door, locked from the inside. That's when I noticed something new on the dresser, an old Polaroid camera. It hadn't been there before. I picked it up and found a used cartridge inside. Every slot full of instant prints, all of me. My face in sleep, my mouth slightly open, my hands curled over the blanket. My head felt light, my stomach twisting in a way that felt deeper than fear. I bolted out of the bedroom and stopped short. The photos on the wall in the living room weren't the same anymore. The man in the chair, Gordon or whoever he was, wasn't alone in them. In every photo, I was there too, standing behind him, asleep, my face half visible over his shoulder. I stumbled backward, nearly knocking over a lamp. My mind tried to explain it. Digital manipulation, projection, something rational. But the pictures were physical prints, framed under glass. My own image was there, captured in black and white, matching my exact pajamas from last night. I ran for the door. It opened without resistance. My car was still outside, but the dust on the hood was freshly disturbed. Finger streaks, as though someone had leaned there watching the window. I jumped in, started the engine, and reversed hard enough to kick gravel across the porch. I didn't stop until I hit the main highway. I called Airbnb once I reached Kerrville proper. I wanted to report the listing, but when I opened the app, it was gone. No listing, no host named Gordon, nothing under my trips. The payment had processed, but there was no trace of the reservation. The customer service rep thought I was mistaken. She said, if there's no record of a stay, maybe it was canceled before check-in. I checked my messages. They were gone too. The entire thread with Gordon had vanished. I sat there in the parking lot of a diner, shaking, scrolling through my camera roll. The photos were gone. Every single one. The folder was empty. That night I stayed in a motel near Junction. I couldn't sleep, kept replaying the sound of the shutter in my head. Around 11 p.m. I noticed something in the motel room. A framed photograph above the desk. It showed a smiling man sitting on a chair, black and white, same faint half-smile. Only this time he looked younger. In his hand, resting on his lap, was a Polaroid camera. And though I couldn't see clearly through the glass, I swear the reflection in its lens showed a sleeping figure. Someone who looked exactly like me. I checked out before sunrise and drove straight through to Austin. I haven't opened Airbnb since. A few days later, curiosity got the better of me, and I searched Gordon again, scrolling through endless hosts and profiles. Nothing. Then last week, I found a new listing outside Kerrville. Brand new listing, quiet and peaceful. The description was almost identical. No reviews yet. The host's name this time was Jonathan. The profile picture looked familiar. It was me, smiling faintly in a brown sweater, sitting on a wooden chair. The first thing every guest saw when they arrived at the cabin was the porch light. It was one of those old-fashioned glass fixtures with a copper hood, the kind that always glowed a little too warmly, like candlelight trapped behind fog. The host's message on the check-in note was clear. Please leave the porch light on overnight for safety. The message was printed, not handwritten, taped to the inside of the door with an old piece of yellowing Scotch tape. There was no explanation, just that single polite instruction sitting there like a rule carved into the house itself. Mark and Lacey arrived on a Friday evening, tired after the 5-hour drive from Dallas. The cabin sat just off Farm Road 1623, tucked behind a bend of live oaks that hid it from the highway. It looked ordinary enough. A front porch with 2 rocking chairs, a small gravel drive, the faint outline of the Blanco River shimmering through the trees. When they parked, the sun was already setting, and that porch light was already burning, glowing through the thin veil of insects that swarmed around it. Cute place, Lacey said as they stepped out. She rubbed her arms against the evening chill, her breath already misting. Feels cozy. Mark nodded, though he found something odd about the way the light flickered. Not in the bulb, but in the air around it, as if the shadows didn't quite know where to settle. He brushed it off. It was late October, and the hill country always carried that kind of atmosphere. Warm days that gave way to cold, damp nights. The hosts had left the door unlocked, and inside the cabin smelled like cedar and lemon oil. It was clean, rustic, maybe too perfect, like a rental stage for a catalog photo. There was a welcome binder on the table, pages for local restaurants, hiking trails, emergency contacts. Then the same message again, this time bolded. Please leave the porch light on overnight for safety. Lacey chuckled. Guess they're really serious about that. Mark shrugged. Maybe there's coyotes or something. But there weren't any coyotes that close to the river anymore. Later, while unloading the car, Mark noticed something else. Across the narrow gravel road was another cabin, nearly identical in design but dark, windows shut tight, porch empty. A rusted pickup sat beside it, flat tires sunk halfway into the dirt. When he asked their host by text if anyone lived across the road, the reply came quick. No, not for years. Please keep your light on tonight. That night, Mark couldn't sleep. The sound of the river outside was steady, but under it there was something else, a rhythm almost like footsteps on gravel, moving slow and uneven across the front yard. He sat up holding his breath and the sound stopped. He waited, staring at the faint line of yellow that spilled in from under the door. Then, just as he was about to lie back down, he heard it again. Scrape, pause, step. Like someone dragging one foot behind them. He eased out of bed, grabbed the flashlight from his bag and crept toward the window. The porch light glowed, but the edge of the yard looked wrong. The air beyond the glow seemed thicker, like mist, and in the faint yellow circle he saw what looked like a boot print. Then another, leading toward the door. He stayed there for a long minute watching. Nothing moved. When he finally opened the door, the prints were gone. The gravel was undisturbed, the yard silent. Only the light burned, buzzing faintly. The next morning, he told Lacey about it over coffee. She laughed at first, then frowned when she saw how serious he looked. "You sure it wasn't an animal?" It sounded like shoes. They walked outside and he pointed to where he thought he'd seen the prints. The gravel was smooth. No sign of anything. The air smelled like wet pine. Across the road, the abandoned cabin stood in perfect stillness. And for the first time, Lacey noticed something unsettling. The porch light fixture there was the same as theirs. Though the bulb was long dead, the glass blackened with dust. They spent most of the day in town, visiting antique shops and a small cafe that overlooked the river. When they came back that evening, the light on their porch was already on again. Mark was sure he had turned it off that morning. "Maybe it's on a timer," Lacey said, but there was no switch, no mention of automation in the manual. He checked anyway, nothing. The bulb had a faint hum, like a faraway insect trapped in glass. That night it started again. The footsteps came later, closer to midnight. This time Lacey heard them too. They both froze in bed, holding their breath. Step, scrape, step. It circled the porch, slow and deliberate, like someone pacing. Then came the creak of the wooden boards just outside the door. Mark whispered, "I'm calling the cops." But before he could move, a soft thud came from the porch, something bumping against the wall, followed by a faint dragging sound. Then silence. They waited. When Mark finally found the courage to open the curtain, there was nothing there. Just the porch light burning, the glass fogged with condensation. The next morning, they found something strange. Under the porch light, right below the fixture, the wood was scorched. A dark ring, faint but visible, like heat had radiated outward. Lacey touched it and drew her hand back. It was still warm. That afternoon, Mark asked around in town. Most people didn't know much about the cabin, just that it had been part of an old ranch property before it was turned into a short-term rental. One older man at the gas station said something that stuck with him. "That place?" he said, scratching at his beard. "Ain't no surprise they tell you to keep that light on. Folks used to see something on that road after sundown. My daddy called it the Riverwalker. Said it came looking for the house that left the light off. Never found much proof, but every few years someone would swear they saw a figure out there, walking in circles like it was lost." Mark tried to laugh it off. But when they got back that evening, he checked under the porch again. The burned ring was darker now. The air smelled faintly metallic, like a struck match. That night, Lacey woke to the sound of the door handle rattling. She whispered Mark's name and he sat up instantly. The sound came again, slow, steady, deliberate. Then a whisper right on the other side of the wood. A man's voice, hoarse and cracked. "Lights on," it said. "Let me see." Lacey clutched Mark's arm. Neither of them moved. The voice came again, softer this time. "Let me see the light." Mark stood trembling and shouted, "Get off my porch." The whisper stopped. The light flickered once, just enough to dim the room, then steadied again. They stayed awake until dawn. When Mark opened the door in the morning, he saw something pressed into the wood. A black handprint, long-fingered and charred like it had been burned there. They left that afternoon. Didn't even bother to check out properly, just packed the car and drove toward Austin. When Mark tried to call the host, the number was disconnected. The listing was gone by evening. 2 weeks later, Mark found himself scrolling through rental sites again. Same area, same county. One caught his eye, a nearly identical cabin with a familiar porch. He clicked through the photos. The same furniture, the same layout. In the description, the same instruction. Please leave the porch light on overnight for safety. But in the fifth photo, barely visible through the reflection in the window, stood a figure. It wasn't clear, but it looked like a man. Tall, thin, standing right where the porch light should be. And behind him, the glow wasn't yellow anymore. It was red. Mark stared at the photo until his eyes watered. Then he closed the page, shut his laptop, and turned to Lacey. The light outside their apartment flickered once, dimmed and steadied. He didn't check to see if it stayed on. It started as a faint sound, one I told myself was nothing but the house settling. The kind of harmless creak that old wood makes when the night cools after a hot Texas day. But over time, it became rhythmic, deliberate, and heavier than anything caused by air or temperature. Footsteps, slow and measured, pacing back and forth right above my ceiling, every night around the same time between 2 and 3 in the morning. Always stopping directly above my bed. The house was a short-term rental in Kerrville, a quiet little place tucked near the Guadalupe River. I'd booked it for a month while working remotely, hoping for peace after leaving Houston. The listing had been clear, attic sealed since 1994. I remembered that detail because it struck me as oddly specific. Sealed, not unused or empty, sealed. The owner, a man named Glenn, had even mentioned it during check-in. "We had a problem years ago with squirrels, sealed the whole thing up. No access, no worries," he'd said, tapping the ceiling beam like he was proud of the job. The first night was uneventful. I unpacked, cooked some pasta, and sat on the porch listening to cicadas. The second night, I woke up at 2:11 a.m. to that soft creaking above me. Just a few steps, maybe 3 or 4, then silence. I waited, heart pounding, straining to hear anything else. Then nothing. By morning, I convinced myself it was the wind or maybe a raccoon. By the fourth night, it wasn't random anymore. The steps had a pattern, like someone pacing the length of the attic. 4 steps forward, pause, then 4 steps back. Over and over again, right above my room. It went on for nearly half an hour before stopping abruptly, followed by a faint dragging sound like something heavy being pulled across the floorboards. I mentioned it to Glenn when he came by to mow the yard the next day. He chuckled, but it wasn't a friendly laugh. "Probably just settling," he said too quickly. "Or maybe a rat that got in before I sealed it. Happens sometimes." I offered to pay for an exterminator, but he waved it off. "No need. Trust me, there's no way in there." Then he left, leaving a faint smell of motor oil and sweat behind. That night I stayed up with a flashlight. I turned off all the lights at 1:50 and waited, sitting in bed, every nerve tight as wire. At 2:07 the sound began again, 4 slow, deliberate steps. But this time I noticed something different. The floor beneath me faintly vibrated with each footfall. It wasn't light like a squirrel. It was heavy, human. I whispered, "Hello?" And the sound stopped instantly. For a long moment there was absolute silence. Then came 3 sharp knocks from directly above me. I froze, my throat felt dry as paper. I scrambled out of bed, grabbed my keys, and ran outside barefoot, standing in the damp grass, staring up at the roof. Nothing. No lights, no movement, no sign of anyone. I sat in my car until sunrise. The next morning I noticed something I hadn't before. In the hallway near the bathroom, the ceiling paint was slightly discolored, a square outline where an attic hatch should be. It had been plastered over, but not perfectly. I could still make out where a pull cord might have once hung. I stood under it, staring, feeling something deep in my stomach twist. I sent Glenn a message asking again if he was sure there was no attic access. He didn't reply all day. Around sunset, I walked to the neighbor's property, an older woman who was sitting on her porch shelling peas. I asked if she knew anything about the house. She squinted at me, the wrinkles around her eyes tightening. "You're staying in the Morris place?" she asked. "They should have torn that house down years ago. Ain't been right since that thing up there." I asked what she meant. She shook her head. "Don't want to talk about it. All I know is after 94, nobody stayed long. My husband heard it too when we helped board it up. Sounded like someone walking. That night I didn't sleep. I kept all the lights on, sat in the living room with a kitchen knife beside me. The footsteps didn't start until almost 3. But they weren't above the bedroom anymore. They were above the living room now, moving directly over me. And this time I heard breathing. Slow, labored, raspy breathing that seemed to fill the entire ceiling space. I called Glenn, no answer. I left 3 voicemails, my voice shaking, telling him I was leaving if he didn't check the attic. I didn't hear from him until the next afternoon. His reply was short, "Please don't go up there." "I'll handle it." That line, "don't go up there," played in my head all day. I told myself I wouldn't. But as evening fell, curiosity gnawed at me like a fever. Around 10, I took a flashlight, a small hammer, and climbed onto a chair under the plastered hatch. The patch was thin, crumbly. A few hits with the hammer cracked it enough to peel it away. Dust poured down like ash. Behind it, there was a small crawl space, black as pitch and thick with the smell of rot. I shined the flashlight inside. At first, all I saw were cobwebs and old insulation. Then I noticed something tucked into the far corner. A set of small, filthy footprints leading across the boards. Human footprints. I was shaking so badly I almost dropped the flashlight. I aimed it further and caught a glimpse of fabric. It looked like an old shirt, yellowed with age, half buried under debris. I reached up with the hammer, hooked the fabric and pulled it down. It was a child's shirt, stiff with age and dust, the name Ben written on the tag in faded marker. I heard a sound then, not from above but from behind me. Breathing. Slow, ragged, close enough that I felt the air move against my neck. I turned fast, swinging the flashlight beam wildly. Nothing. The house was still, quiet except for the ticking of the kitchen clock. I backed away, heart racing, and left the plaster cracked open. I didn't sleep. When the footsteps started again, I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, but something had changed. The steps weren't above me anymore, they were between the walls. I could hear them in the plaster, crawling, dragging. A faint scratching like fingernails tracing the studs. By dawn, I'd packed everything into my car. As I was loading the last bag, Glenn's truck pulled into the driveway. He got out slowly, looking tired, older somehow. "You opened it, didn't you?" he said, voice low. I nodded. He closed his eyes for a long time. "I told you not to." He walked inside without another word. I waited in the car, engine running, watching through the window as he disappeared into the hallway. A few minutes later, I heard a loud crash, then silence. I got out, called his name, no answer. When I stepped inside, the house was still. The air felt colder, heavier. I called out again. Then I heard a sound from the attic. Something shifting, scraping. And Glenn's voice, faint, strained, saying my name. I bolted out, drove until my hands stopped shaking, and never went back. A few days later, curiosity got the better of me again. I looked up the property on the Kerr County Assessor's site. It hadn't been listed under Glenn's name. The owner was Benjamin Morris. The record showed he'd died in 1994, age 9. Cause of death, accident, attic fall. The listing for the rental vanished a week later. The house itself was torn down months after that. But sometimes when I can't sleep, I still think about those footsteps. How they always started at the same time, how they stopped the moment I listened. And how for that 1 second before silence, it almost sounded like someone whispering through the ceiling, asking to come down. The message came in at 9:37 p.m., right as the sun was finally bleeding out over the hills behind the cabins. I was standing by the sink rinsing a mug when my phone buzzed on the counter. "Hope everything's going well with your stay, just checking in. Has the caretaker met you yet?" I stared at it for a second, trying to remember if I'd actually seen anyone around. The host's name was Daniel, and his tone in the earlier messages had been almost excessively polite. Directions to the cabin, Wi-Fi password, a few notes about local wildlife and the old septic system. I'd checked in that afternoon, used the key from the lockbox, and hadn't seen another soul since turning off the county road. I texted back, "No, haven't met anyone yet, all good though," and forgot about it for a while. The cabin was in a pocket of oak trees off FM 689, a few miles outside Llano. Rustic, clean enough with mismatched furniture and that faint, sweet smell of varnished pine and old dust. The listing had mentioned historic charm, which usually meant creaky floors and bad insulation, but I didn't mind. I was in town for a short break, trying to get away from Austin's noise, hoping to finish some freelance work and sleep for more than 4 hours. By 10, the woods outside were a blur of dark shapes, and the only sound was a single cicada that hadn't realized the season was over. I poured some wine, sat on the porch, and felt a rare kind of quiet sink in. At 10:41, another buzz. "Just making sure if the caretaker stops by, don't be alarmed. He sometimes checks in on guests to make sure everything's comfortable." I almost laughed. "All good. Haven't seen anyone," I typed. There was no reason to expect anyone. The driveway was gravel and I would have heard a car. Still, I glanced out toward the tree line. My car was the only thing reflecting the faint porch light. Beyond it, the woods were absolute black. I shut the door, locked it, and went to bed. Around 1 in the morning, I woke up without knowing why. The air felt off heavy, a little too still. The bedside clock glowed 1:07. I lay there listening and thought I heard something under the faint hum of the window unit. A shuffle, then another. The kind of slow, soft movement that comes from someone trying not to be heard. I sat up. The sound was near the back door, maybe the deck. I waited, holding my breath until it stopped. Nothing else, just silence so deep it pressed against my ears. I finally convinced myself it was a raccoon, maybe a deer brushing against the porch rail. Still, when I got up to check, I grabbed the old iron fireplace poker leaning by the hearth. The deck was empty, but the door handle was cold, like metal from outside. I double-checked the lock, pulled the curtains, and went back to bed. At 2:13, my phone buzzed again.
He hasn't stopped by yet?
No name, no signature, just that line. I frowned and typed back, "No one's here." Is he supposed to? 10 seconds later, the 3 dots appeared, paused, then vanished. No reply after that. I stayed awake a long time, staring at the ceiling, watching the faint flicker of the digital clock crawl toward dawn. By morning, everything seemed embarrassingly normal. Sunlight streamed through the warped blinds and the air smelled faintly of coffee and cedar. I decided I'd just let it go. Hosts were weird sometimes, overly attentive. Maybe Daniel had someone local who looked after the property. Around 9, I texted him again. "All's good here. Never saw anyone last night." He replied almost instantly. "Oh, good. He usually checks in by now. If you see him today, let me know." I wanted to ask who he was exactly, but I didn't want to sound paranoid. Later, while making breakfast, I noticed something odd. On the back porch, near the edge of the step, there was a small patch of damp dirt. Not rain damp, it hadn't rained in days, but as if someone had stood there with wet shoes. A faint heel print, maybe a boot, too big to be mine. I knelt and ran my finger across it. The soil was fresh, a little dark and cold to the touch. That uneasy feeling crawled back in. I wiped my hand, locked the door, and decided to drive into town for a few hours. Yana was small, friendly, and still hanging on to that mid-century Texas charm. I had lunch, browsed an antique shop, and asked the woman at the counter if she knew of the rental cabins out on 689. "The old Finley property?" she said. "Yeah, that's been on and off the market for years. Used to be managed by some caretaker, what was his name, Frank or Fred? Nice old guy." She frowned. "But he died, I think, back in the late 2000s. Heart attack or something. They said his body wasn't found for a week." My stomach dropped a little. "You sure?" I asked, trying to sound casual. "Pretty sure," she said. "Why?" I thanked her, mumbled something about renting it for the weekend, and left. Back at the cabin around 3, the air felt heavier again. The inside temperature was fine, but the atmosphere seemed thick, almost charged. I tried to shake it off, but every shadow in that cabin seemed slightly wrong. The host hadn't texted again, and I didn't want to start something by asking about a dead caretaker. Still, as dusk fell, I found myself checking every lock, pulling the curtains tight and leaving a light on in the hall. The message came again at 9:26. "Everything okay tonight?" Did the caretaker introduce himself yet? I stared at the words, feeling the weight of them. I typed back, "I think you're mistaken. You said caretaker, but I was told he died years ago." I hit send. For a full minute, nothing. Then, "Oh, I'm so sorry. That message wasn't meant for you." My pulse quickened. "What do you mean?" I sent no answer. I waited, pacing the small living room, then noticed something in the reflection of the TV screen. Movement behind me. I spun, but no one was there. The door was still closed. The windows were latched, but the faint, wet footprint near the hallway rug hadn't been there before. I took the poker again, checked the bathroom, the bedroom, the kitchen. Empty. I even opened the back door and shined my phone light across the deck. The beam caught something halfway down the steps. A handprint, dark and wet, smudged across the wood. I backed inside, shut the door, and pushed a chair against it. Then my phone lit up again, not with a text but a photo. No sender ID, just the number I'd been messaging. The photo was blurry, but it showed the cabin from outside, the porch light glowing. In the lower corner, barely visible, a figure was standing among the trees. I zoomed in until the pixels broke apart, but I could still make out the outline of a man in a work coat, head slightly tilted, watching. I called the number. Straight to voicemail. I didn't leave a message. My brain was racing through every rational explanation. Prank, stalker, scammer. Anything but what I'd heard in town. Still, I couldn't ignore the details. The wet marks, the chill in the air, the silence between the trees. I decided I was leaving. I packed fast, didn't even bother to fold anything, and tossed everything into the back seat. As I pulled out of the driveway, I glanced in the mirror. The cabin stood small and dim, the porch light flickering faintly. For a second, I thought I saw someone standing near the steps, but I didn't stop to check. I made it halfway to town before another text appeared. No need to rush off. He just likes to make sure guests are comfortable. My skin prickled. I hit call again, and this time the voicemail picked up after one ring. "Hi, this is Daniel with Hill Country Rentals. Sorry I missed you. Leave a message and I'll get back soon." His voice sounded normal, calm. Then, before the beep, there was another faint sound, like someone breathing close to the microphone. A whisper I couldn't make out. I didn't go back for the refund or to return the key. I left it in the mailbox at the post office. A week later, out of morbid curiosity, I checked the listing again. It was gone. I tried searching for the host's name, the phone number, nothing. Then I looked up the property records for the address and my chest went cold. The caretaker's name was Frank R. Mullins. He'd been found dead on that land in 2009. Cause of death: cardiac arrest while clearing storm debris. Owner of record Daniel Mullins, his son. I shut my laptop and tried to forget it, but sometimes late at night I'll get a text from an unknown number. Always polite, always short. Has the caretaker stopped by yet? The house sat on the far edge of town, where the pavement gave up and turned to caliche and the mesquite grew thick enough to scrape the sides of your car. I'd rented it because it was cheap, quiet, and came with a wide porch that faced the west, the kind of place I imagined writing in peace. The ad had warned that service may vary, but that didn't bother me. I wasn't planning to stream movies or live online anyway. I just needed a desk, a roof, and silence. The Wi-Fi worked fine for the first few nights. It wasn't fast, but it held up well enough for email and uploading a few photos of sunsets over the scrubland. Then one night around 10, as a storm rolled in from the hills, my connection froze. I sighed, checked the router's blinking lights, and saw my phone flash a notification. It read, "Someone is trying to connect from inside your network." At first, I thought it was some kind of automatic alert. Maybe a glitch or my laptop reconnecting. I dismissed it, unplugged the router, and went to bed. The next morning, everything worked fine again. By the third night, the same thing happened. The connection died, the router clicked, and my phone buzzed with that same message. "Someone is trying to connect from inside your network." This time, I opened the details. It listed a device named Unknown 689D34, the kind of thing you'd see if a neighbor tried to mooch Wi-Fi. But out here, there were no neighbors. Just dirt, barbed wire, and cactus stretching for miles. I changed the password, rebooted the router, and tried to ignore it. A few days later, I was sitting at my desk trying to write while the wind rattled the old storm windows. The power flickered twice, then came back. My laptop froze mid-sentence. I glanced at my phone again. Same notification. "Someone is trying to connect from inside your network." I stared at the words longer this time. Inside, not nearby. Not external, inside. I decided to run a network scan. One device, my phone. Another, my laptop. A third one appeared marked only as unknown. It disappeared before I could click it. That night I unplugged everything before going to bed. The rain came down heavy, drumming the tin roof like fingers. Sometime around midnight I woke to the faint sound of footsteps in the hallway. Slow, deliberate, soft on the wood. I froze listening. The sound stopped. The only thing I heard after that was the wind sighing through the cracks. The next morning I checked the locks. Front door bolted. Back door latched. No footprints, no mud, no sign anyone had been inside. I convinced myself I'd dreamed it. Still, I couldn't shake the unease. I set up a small motion camera facing the hallway, one I'd used before to film deer behind my old house. It stored recordings locally, no internet needed. That night, the Wi-Fi went out again around the same time. The same notification buzzed my phone bright in the dark. I ignored it, lay still, and listened. At 12:47 a.m., there were footsteps again, slower this time. Then a faint scraping, like cloth brushing a wall. I didn't move. The sound stopped right outside my bedroom door. I held my breath until the silence felt alive. When I finally reached for my phone, the screen was black, dead. The charger light glowed red, but the phone wouldn't turn on. When I woke, it was morning. The phone worked again, fully charged. The camera light was blinking, meaning it had recorded something. My hands were shaking as I loaded the footage. It started normal. Me turning off the lights, getting into bed. The timestamp hit 12:46, then the camera flickered. For a moment, the hallway looked darker than it should have. The pixels warped and something moved in the corner. A tall, thin shadow stretching from the floor to the ceiling. It drifted past the lens, and for a second I could make out what looked like the shape of a hand dragging along the wall. Fingers splayed. Then it vanished. I replayed the clip over and over, trying to convince myself it was a trick of the light, compression artifacts, anything logical. But each time the hand looked too defined, too slow, like it was moving with purpose. That afternoon I called the property owner, a man named Davis. He sounded older, polite, but distracted. I asked if anyone else had ever complained about the Wi-Fi or strange activity. He paused a long time before answering. "You're in the back room, right? The one by the hallway?" "Yeah," I said. He exhaled. "You might want to sleep in the front for a bit. That room's had issues." "What kind of issues?" He cleared his throat. "The signal doesn't work right in there. Always drops. No one's sure why. It's just that room." I wanted to push further, but he ended the call with a quick, "Let me know if it keeps happening." That night I moved my things to the front room. The Wi-Fi stayed solid until nearly 1 in the morning. Then as I was watching a video, the connection froze again. Same notification. "Someone is trying to connect from inside your network." This time I stayed up. The old house groaned as the wind shifted. A few minutes passed. Then I heard the faint creak of a floorboard from the back room. I grabbed my flashlight and stepped into the hall. The beam cut through the dust. The door to the back room was ajar. I pushed it open slowly. The air felt colder. The smell was wrong too. Stale, like wet earth and old electricity. My router's light was blinking wildly as if something was pulling power. I took a cautious step forward, then saw something that made my stomach turn. The screen of my laptop, which I'd left unplugged, was glowing faintly. On it was a single message typed into a blank document. "Stop disconnecting me." The words repeated on a loop, line after line, filling the screen. I slammed the lid shut, yanked the power cord from the wall, and backed out of the room. I slept in my truck that night. In the morning, I drove into town and told Davis I was leaving. He didn't sound surprised. He offered to refund the rest of the month's rent without argument. As I handed him the keys, I asked one last question. "What's with that room? Be honest." He rubbed his chin and looked out the window before speaking. "You ever notice the floor in there? Kind of uneven?" "Yeah," he nodded slowly. "That room used to be part of the original house. Back before the fire, the family that lived there kept one of the boys in that room after he started acting strange. They said he'd spend all night talking to people who weren't there. Claimed they lived in the wires, the walls, the current. When the fire came, they found him in the corner by the outlet, holding a burnt cord. The fire started there." I stared at him, speechless. He shrugged. "We rebuilt, of course. But the service never worked right in that spot. I figure the lines are just bad." I drove away without looking back. That night in a motel 2 towns over, I turned on my phone to check messages. As the screen lit up, a notification appeared at the top. "New device connected, unknown 6A9D34. Then another one followed. "Someone is trying to connect from inside your network." And before I could turn the phone off, the motel lights flickered, and the Wi-Fi signal disappeared. It was the sound of the refrigerator that woke him, that faint hum that always seemed louder when the house was still. He blinked in the dim kitchen light, his eyes slow to adjust. The clock above the stove said 3:47 a.m. The air felt too quiet, too heavy. For a moment he couldn't remember why he was there, standing barefoot on the cold linoleum in his boxers. Then he saw them, his truck keys. They were lying neatly on the counter, the key ring glinting under the pale light like a deliberate offering. He stared at them for a long moment, unable to move. Before he'd gone to bed, he'd locked those keys inside his truck. He remembered it vividly because he'd cursed himself afterward, realizing too late that the spare was still in the glove box. He'd told himself he'd call a locksmith in the morning. That was around 11:30 last night. He hadn't been drinking. He wasn't the type to misplace things either. But now the keys were right there, arranged in a straight line, not dropped, not tossed, placed. His pulse quickened. The old cabin wasn't big, just a single-story rental he'd taken for a weekend hunting trip along the Rio Grande near Lajitas. It sat alone on a dirt road off FM 170, surrounded by mesquite and thorn bush, the nearest neighbors a good half-mile away. He'd locked every door before turning in, even wedged a chair under the back doorknob out of habit. The front door had one of those old skeleton key locks that didn't feel trustworthy, so he'd jammed it shut with a deadbolt too. The windows all had nails in them, hammered halfway down to stop them from opening more than a few inches. He'd checked them himself twice, but someone had been inside. He tried to convince himself there was a reasonable explanation. Maybe he'd forgotten he'd brought them in. Maybe he'd gone out to get something from the truck and didn't remember. But even as he told himself that, he knew he hadn't. He was a light sleeper, easily woken by the slightest sound, and now the silence felt wrong, stretched thin. The hair on his arms rose. He turned on the kitchen light fully and scanned the room. Nothing seemed out of place. The table was clear except for his thermos and his phone, which was plugged in near the window. The phone showed full battery, but when he picked it up, he noticed a faint smudge across the screen, like a thumbprint, oily and fresh. He hadn't used it since before bed. His lock screen was still active, but his call history showed an outgoing call at 1:18 a.m. to an unknown number. He hadn't made that call. He backed away from the counter slowly, his eyes darting toward the hallway that led to the bedroom. The door was cracked open just as he'd left it, but the darkness beyond looked deeper now, like it held its breath. He swallowed and forced himself to speak.
Hello?
His voice sounded too small, too thin for the space. The house didn't answer. Only the creak of the wood beneath his feet broke the quiet. He moved down the hallway, each step cautious. The floorboards whispered under his weight. When he reached the bedroom, he saw his duffel bag on the chair by the wall, half unzipped. He hadn't left it that way. His clothes were folded differently too. Someone had touched them. The lamp beside the bed had been turned slightly, its pull chain swaying gently, though no draft stirred the air. He felt sick. Someone had been in the room while he slept, watching him. The bedsheets were slightly cool when he pressed his hand against them, like they'd been exposed to air for a long time. On the pillow next to his, a faint indentation remained, as if someone had lain there, head resting just inches from his. He stumbled back, chest tight. That was when he saw the closet door. It was open about an inch. He knew he'd shut it earlier because he couldn't sleep with it open. He'd always been that way ever since he was a kid. He didn't want to look inside. Every instinct screamed at him to grab the keys, get in the truck, and go. But the part of his mind that demanded reason, the part that needed to know, forced him forward. He reached for the door handle, hand trembling. He pulled it open. Nothing. Just darkness and the smell of old wood. His boots sat at the bottom where he'd left them. His jacket hung limp on the hook. But on the floor, barely visible against the planks, was something small and pale. He crouched. It was a button, old pearly with a faint crack running through it. It didn't belong to him. That was when the faintest sound touched his ears, a rhythmic tapping like fingernails brushing against glass. He froze. It came from the front room, from the kitchen. The refrigerator hum had stopped. The air was too still. He crept forward, each breath shallow. The tapping continued, steady and patient, as if whoever or whatever was doing it wanted him to hear. He rounded the corner and saw the source. Someone was tapping the kitchen window from the outside. The curtain was drawn halfway, and through the small gap he could see the outline of a hand. Just the silhouette, nothing else. The fingers were long, thin, moving in a deliberate rhythm. Tap, tap, tap. He didn't move. The hand lingered, then slowly slid out of view. His stomach dropped. The nearest tree was a good 20 feet from that window. There was no porch, no ledge, nothing to stand on. Whatever that hand belonged to had to be pressed right against the glass, and it had been high, higher than any normal person could reach from outside without a ladder. He bolted for the counter, grabbed his keys, and ran to the front door. The deadbolt turned smoothly. Too smoothly. When he pulled it open, the chair he'd wedged beneath the handle earlier was gone. He looked outside. His truck sat in the driveway, glistening faintly under the moonlight. Its driver's side door was open. He hesitated at the threshold, every nerve screaming not to step out there. But staying inside felt worse. He sprinted across the yard, gravel crunching beneath his feet, the sound too loud in the quiet night. He yanked open the truck door. The cabin light came on harsh and white, revealing the empty seats. Nothing looked disturbed except for one thing. His rearview mirror had been turned sharply toward the passenger seat. And on that seat lay a folded piece of paper. He reached for it with a shaking hand and opened it. The handwriting was cramped, jagged, written in pencil. 5 words. "Thank you for letting me in." He stumbled back, bile rising in his throat. The night pressed around him heavy and thick. The desert wind whispered through the brush, dry and cold. He turned toward the cabin. The kitchen light was still on, spilling weak yellow onto the dirt. The window he'd seen the hand at was now open a few inches, the curtain fluttering lightly. And then, just for a moment, he saw movement. A figure shifting in the dim light, tall and still, standing exactly where he had been moments ago. He didn't think. He jumped into the truck, slammed the door, jammed the key into the ignition and turned it. The engine roared to life. He reversed fast, tires spitting gravel, headlights cutting through the dust. As he hit the road, he glanced once more toward the cabin. The front door, which he'd left open, was now closed. He drove through the darkness, his hands white on the wheel, the road stretching endlessly ahead. He didn't stop until he reached Presidio, the first flicker of streetlights breaking the void. He pulled into the parking lot of a diner, shaking so badly he could barely hold his phone. When he finally looked at it, he saw new notifications, photo thumbnails filling the screen. Dozens of them, all taken between midnight and 3 a.m. Every single one was of him sleeping. In the last photo, the bed beside him wasn't empty. Evan was halfway through his second beer when the host texted the rule again. "Don't open the green door," it read, followed by a smiley face. He chuckled at first, assuming it was some quirky warning to keep guests from poking around the owner's storage. But that smiley face made it feel stranger, like someone forcing lightness over something serious. The rental was an old limestone cottage outside Dripping Springs, Texas, tucked between oak trees and a shallow creek that had long since gone dry. It was quiet, almost too quiet, with only cicadas and the wind scraping the tin roof. The green door was in the hallway, past the kitchen. Its paint was thick, chipped, and a shade darker than the rest of the walls, like it had been repainted too many times. A new brass padlock hung loosely from the latch, though it wasn't locked, just closed. When Evan first arrived, he'd tested the handle out of habit. It didn't move, and the door didn't rattle. Behind it, there was no sound, no draft, just a solid stillness. He shrugged it off. By the third night, the house began to feel heavier. The air was humid inside, no matter how high he set the ceiling fans. A faint, wet smell had started coming from somewhere near the hallway. It reminded him of summer rain hitting hot dirt, mixed with something else. Something sour and rotten, like mulch left too long in a bucket. He opened every window and even checked under the sink, thinking maybe something had died in the pipes, but it persisted. The smell was stronger when he passed the green door. He pressed his hand against the old paint and felt a damp chill seeping through the wood. He told himself it was condensation, or maybe just trapped moisture in the wall. But when he pressed his ear to it, there was a faint sound, a rhythmic drip, like water falling onto stone. That night he couldn't sleep. The sound grew louder, not constant, but steady enough that once you noticed it, it was impossible to ignore. Drip, pause, drip. Each drop seemed closer than before. Around midnight, the air in the room changed. The smell of rot swelled, thick and metallic. He got up, turned on the hall light, and froze. The floorboards in front of the green door were damp. The old wood glistened in the light, darkened by moisture that hadn't been there before. He crouched and touched it, cold and slick. He brought his fingers to his nose and recoiled. It didn't smell like water. It smelled like something that had been buried too long. Evan went outside for air, stepping barefoot onto the porch. The night was warm, dry, and utterly still. Not a single cloud hung in the sky. There hadn't been rain in weeks, yet inside that house something was dripping. He thought about calling the host, but decided against it. He didn't want to sound paranoid. Maybe it was an old pipe leaking behind the wall. Maybe the storage room had bad plumbing. He told himself he'd deal with it in the morning, but sleep never came. Around 3 a.m., he heard a low groan from the hallway, a slow, dragging sound like something heavy being pulled across the floor. Then a thud. He sat up, heart hammering. The sound stopped as soon as he stepped into the hall. The damp spot was gone, but the air smelled stronger than before, sharper, and the green door was wet. A dark line of moisture ran down its center, pooling at the threshold. His skin prickled. He reached for the doorknob, then stopped himself. The host's words came back like a whisper. Don't open the green door. He went back to bed and turned on every light he could. Around dawn, exhaustion pulled him under. When he woke, sunlight poured through the windows and the house looked perfectly normal again. The smell had faded. The floor was dry. For a while, he almost believed he'd imagined it. He made coffee, scrolled through his phone, and when the host texted to ask how his stay was going, he typed, "All good, thanks," and hesitated before pressing send. The green door caught his eye again. It didn't look menacing in daylight, just old with a few warped panels and a small spiderweb hanging near the top corner. He thought about taking a picture, maybe even opening it just a crack to see what was inside. He could always say it had come unlocked on its own. That evening, thunder rolled in the distance. The forecast said clear skies, but the air outside was thick, electric. Evan sat on the couch reading when he heard the dripping again. Slow, deliberate, he turned off the TV and listened. It was coming from the hallway. He grabbed his flashlight and stepped closer. The beam caught the green door glistening as if coated in dew. The air felt cooler, almost damp, like standing near a cave mouth. He leaned in, sniffed, and gagged. The smell of rain mixed with decay was overpowering. Before he realized it, his hand was already on the knob. It turned easily this time, smoother than before, and the door creaked open with a sigh. The air that rushed out was wet and cold. His flashlight flickered, the beam cutting through a haze of mist. The room beyond was small, no bigger than a closet, but the floor wasn't wood. It looked like black soil, glistening with moisture, sloping downward as though the foundation had eroded. Water dripped steadily from somewhere unseen, landing in a shallow puddle that rippled without source. Evan's heart pounded. He crouched and aimed the flashlight lower, and that's when he saw them, fingers pale and swollen, pushing up through the mud. For a moment, he couldn't move. The hand flexed weakly, the nails dark and caked with dirt. Another hand appeared beside it, then another, pressing against the slick ground like something struggling to crawl upward. Evan stumbled back, slamming the door shut. The smell filled the hallway, heavy and suffocating. He ran outside, gasping for air. The night was dry again. No clouds, no thunder, but his shirt clung to him with cold moisture. He grabbed his phone and called the host. It rang once before a calm voice answered. "You opened it, didn't you?" The tone was flat, not angry, not surprised, just resigned. "Listen to me," the voice continued. "You have to leave now. Don't pack, don't turn off the lights, just go. They'll try to follow, but they can't cross the property line if you don't look back." Evan didn't wait for more. He ran to his truck, keys trembling in his hand, and tore down the gravel road. In the rearview mirror, the cottage stood dark against the trees, the porch light flickering like a dying candle. He made it to the main highway before pulling over, chest heaving. He sat there for a long time, gripping the steering wheel, trying to make sense of what he'd seen. When he finally looked at his phone again, the call log was empty. No outgoing call, no message from the host. The next morning, he drove back, telling himself he'd imagined it. The cottage was still there, but the green door was gone, replaced by a plain white wall, smooth and freshly painted. A new guest car sat in the driveway, a family unloading suitcases, laughing in the sunlight. The host's listing was still online, same photos, same cheerful description, and the same line at the bottom, "One rule, please, don't open the storage room." Weeks later, Evan got an envelope in the mail with no return address. Inside was a single Polaroid photo. It showed the green door slightly open, and from the darkness beyond, a pale, mud-streaked hand reaching out toward the light. A small Texas town near Lake Whitney had an Airbnb listing that drew people from all over. It was a modest farmhouse with a wraparound porch, oak trees swaying over the gravel driveway, and sunsets that looked painted. The photos glowed in warm light, and the reviews, all 5 stars, spoke of peaceful nights, friendly hosts, and a sense of calm you couldn't find in cities. Then the reviews started disappearing. One by one, every single 5-star rating vanished after a week, leaving only blank boxes with no text. But each of those vanished reviews left behind the same profile photo. A blurred gray face like a default avatar someone tried to erase with smudges. Amanda booked the place on a whim. She worked in Fort Worth, exhausted from a job that had her staring at screens all day. She wanted quiet, something unconnected. The farmhouse was perfect. No TV, no close neighbors, just a wide porch and the sound of cicadas. She noticed the blank reviews but didn't think much of it. Maybe a website glitch. The host, a woman named Marjorie, messaged her immediately after booking, thanking her and saying she'd leave the key under the third flower pot. "If you hear the creak at night," Marjorie wrote, "don't be alarmed. It's always louder than it should be." Amanda arrived in the late afternoon. The house looked exactly like the pictures. Aged white paint, red tin roof, rocking chairs on the porch. Inside, everything was immaculate, almost too neat. The kitchen smelled faintly like cedar oil and something older, maybe damp wood. On the counter sat a guest book, an actual handwritten one with pens and a floral cover. The first few pages were filled with cheerful entries from past guests, thanking Marjorie for a beautiful stay. But after 2022, the entries stopped abruptly. The remaining pages were blank except for faint indentations as if someone had written, then erased something forcefully. That night, Amanda sat outside with a glass of wine. The woods around the property were thick, whispering in the breeze. The only sound apart from the crickets was the creak, faint but persistent. A watery murmur that didn't seem to match its distance from the house. Every once in a while, it almost sounded like voices. She chalked it up to imagination. Around midnight, her phone buzzed. A notification from the booking app. "Your host has updated their message." She opened it, expecting some late check-in reminder. Instead, it said, "Did you read the reviews?" No signature, no timestamp, and when she tried to reply, the message vanished. The app glitched, refreshing itself until the screen went blank. When it returned, the listing for the farmhouse was gone. She tried to search it again, nothing. It was as if it had never existed. Her booking details still showed her stay, but the property name had been replaced by a string of dashes. She decided it was some back-end issue, turned off her phone and went to bed. At 3 in the morning, she woke to water sounds. Not the creek, but dripping and inside the room. The air was thick and cold. When she turned on the lamp, she saw wet footprints leading from the corner of the room toward the bed, stopping right beside her. They were faint, the size of a man's bare feet, but smeared as if someone had dragged them. She froze, heart pounding. The room smelled faintly of rotten rain. The front door creaked open downstairs. She heard slow, deliberate footsteps crossing the floorboards, then stopping at the base of the stairs. Every instinct told her to stay still. But she grabbed her phone, opened the camera, and pointed it toward the doorway. In the faint light, she could see a figure, just a shadow standing still. It looked like it was facing her, though it had no features she could make out. Then the phone shut off, screen black, battery dead even though it had been charging. When morning came, the footprints were gone, but the floor around her bed was damp. Amanda packed immediately. As she was leaving, she decided to take one last glance at the guest book. Curiosity, habit, she didn't know why. A new entry had appeared in fresh ink. "Thank you for staying, Amanda." You listened. Most don't. There was no signature. Back in Fort Worth, she filed a report through the booking platform. The support rep said there was no record of that property or host. She sent screenshots, but by the next morning, those screenshots were blank gray boxes, the same eerie placeholders she'd seen in the reviews. Every image, every email corrupted. A week later, her review went live automatically since she hadn't removed it. She didn't write anything, just left 5 stars. Then a few days after, she got an email notification. Her review had been archived. When she checked her account, it showed an unfamiliar profile photo, the blurred gray face. Her own face was gone. She tried to change it, delete the review, even contact support again. No use. The app crashed each time she clicked that listing. Finally, she deleted her account entirely. Months passed. She'd almost forgotten the farmhouse. Then one night, scrolling through listings for a vacation spot near Canyon Lake, she froze. A new listing popped up with familiar photos. Same house, same porch, different name. The Creekside Haven. It had only one review so far. A 5-star rating, no text, and her face under what used to be hers as the profile photo. She clicked it, and the screen stayed black for a long moment before a single message appeared. "Did you read the reviews?" The sound of faint water started playing from her phone speaker, distant and constant like a creek too close to her window. The cabin sat alone in a clearing just off a narrow county road that wound through the pines like a forgotten scar. It was the kind of rental that photographers like to use for rustic wedding shoots. String lights on the porch, an old stone fireplace, and a mirror hung above the bed framed in rough-hewn cedar. When Julie first found it online, she'd thought the mirror was just part of the charm, a touch of country luxury. The photos had shown a cozy reflection of the room. White comforter, wooden beams, sunlight slanting through lace curtains. But when they arrived that Friday afternoon, something about it seemed different. The glass was darker than it looked in the pictures. Not dirty, just dark, as if it absorbed light instead of reflecting it. It was meant to be a weekend to patch things up. She and Chris had been fighting for months about work, money, and that vague, silent resentment that creeps into long relationships when both people stop being entirely honest. So they'd booked 2 nights in East Texas near a lake called Lufkin Pines and promised to leave their phones on airplane mode and just reconnect. The air was cool and sweet with pine resin, and the place smelled of dust, soap, and old timber. For a while, it even worked. They opened a bottle of wine, cooked steaks on the porch grill, and talked about stupid things like how quiet the woods were. But the mirror over the bed kept catching Julie's eye. It wasn't positioned naturally. Instead of being centered above the headboard, it leaned slightly forward, angled down at them like a watchful eye. When she lay back, she could see the faint outline of herself and Chris in its blackened surface, but the reflection didn't seem to match the room perfectly. The ceiling beam was lower, the shadows thicker. She told herself it was the lighting, the weird amber hue of the bulbs. But when she shifted in bed, the reflection seemed to lag, just by a fraction of a second, like a video buffering. She blinked and looked away. She didn't want to mention it, not yet. That night, the forest pressed close around the cabin. No traffic sounds, no crickets, just the faint hum of wind through pine needles. Around 2 a.m, Julie woke up to a faint creak. She thought it was the bed shifting under Chris's weight, but when she turned her head, he was asleep, breathing evenly. The creak came again, softer this time from above. She tilted her head back and looked into the mirror. It was too dark to see their faces clearly, but she could make out movement in the reflection. Slow, deliberate movement. A shape seemed to glide just beyond the bed where the dresser stood. She stared, her heart pounding. Nothing in the room moved. Yet in the mirror something shifted again, a darker outline like someone pacing. She sat up and the movement froze. She held her breath, eyes straining. Slowly, she climbed out of bed and reached for the bedside lamp. The bulb flicked on with a warm glow, and the reflection snapped into normalcy. Just her, wide-eyed, hair disheveled, the bed rumpled behind her. She let out a shaky breath. Maybe she'd been dreaming. She touched the mirror. The surface was colder than it should have been, almost damp, and there was the faintest sense of vibration, like distant machinery running somewhere behind it. When Chris stirred, she pulled her hand back quickly. In the morning, she tried to laugh it off. "I think this place is haunted," she joked as she made coffee. Chris smirked and said something about old wiring and bad insulation. But when she asked if he'd noticed how the mirror was tilted, he frowned. "It's mounted in the wall, Jules. You can't tilt a mirror like that." He climbed on the bed and tapped at the edges. It didn't sound like wood or plaster, more like hollow metal. "Maybe it's backed by a crawl space or something," he said, trying to sound casual. He ran his fingers along the edges, then froze. There was a hairline gap along the top, no thicker than a pencil lead. From certain angles, you could see through it, past the glass into a void that swallowed the light. "Probably just insulation," he muttered, but he didn't meet her eyes when he said it. They tried to ignore it. They spent the day hiking near the lake, taking photos of cypress knees and herons eating sandwiches on the tailgate of their truck. But that night, when they returned, Julie noticed something small but unmistakable. The mirror was cleaner. The streaks she'd seen before were gone, wiped away. The glass gleamed. She hadn't touched it, neither had Chris. The bed looked slightly shifted too, as if someone had dragged it a few inches forward. She felt a wave of nausea. "Did you move the bed?" she asked. He frowned, looked down, and saw the drag marks on the floorboards. "No," he said quietly. They both stared at the mirror. At some point, fear gives way to curiosity, and curiosity in places like that is dangerous. Around midnight, when the wind picked up and the porch light flickered, Chris said, "Let's just see what's behind it. Then we can stop thinking about it." He fetched a screwdriver from the kitchen drawer. The screws came out easily, too easily. When he lifted the frame, a rush of cold air poured through, smelling of wet earth and something metallic. Behind the mirror wasn't drywall, it was glass, thick, tinted, and smooth. Julie stepped closer, realizing what it was. "It's one way," she whispered. "Like an interrogation room." They both stared. Behind the glass was a narrow corridor. unlit except for a dull orange bulb flickering somewhere in the distance. The walls were concrete. Julie pressed her face to the glass and thought she saw a shape move in the far end of the hall, too quick to identify, too silent to be a draft. Chris cursed under his breath and reached for his phone, forgetting there was no signal. Then the bulb behind the glass flickered once more and went out. They slept with the lights on, though neither really slept. Around 3, a sound woke them both at once, a dull, rhythmic knock coming from behind the mirror. Julie clutched Chris's arm and they watched as faint pressure marks appeared on the other side of the glass, like fingertips pressing from within. One by one they trailed down, then stopped. The silence that followed was worse. Then came the soft drag of something heavy against concrete, retreating into that unseen corridor. Chris shouted and the sound echoed strangely, as if the walls were hollow. By dawn they were packed. They didn't even finish the coffee. But when Chris went to start the truck, the keys weren't where he'd left them. They searched the cabin, frantic, until Julie spotted something glinting behind the mirror. Someone or something had placed the keys on a small metal shelf in the darkness beyond the glass. When she leaned close, the faint light returned in the corridor, just enough to reveal that the floor was covered in discarded items, suitcases, jackets, and shoes, arranged in careful rows. All of them were old, dust-coated, belonging to people who had probably rented the same cabin. The smell that drifted through the gap was unbearable. They ran. They didn't lock the door, didn't even look back until they reached the main road. By the time they found a diner with cell service, neither spoke. The owner looked at them strangely when they mentioned the address. "That place ain't supposed to be rented," she said. "Belonged to a family years back. They left after their daughter disappeared. Some drifter got arrested later. They said he'd built tunnels under the property. Cops sealed the whole thing." Chris and Julie just stared at her. The woman frowned. "You sure you were at the right cabin?" "They called the rental site, but the listing was gone. Deleted, they never got their deposit back." Weeks later, a deputy from the county sheriff's office left a voicemail. They'd gone out to the location and found the place empty, boarded up. But in the back room, nailed to the wall where the mirror had been, they'd found something odd. 2 sets of handprints, small and recent, pressed into the dust on the glass. The prints faced inward. The cabin at Cedar Hollow sat at the edge of the pines, about 3 miles past the sign that had half fallen into the ditch. There was no number on the gate, just a wooden plank with the words Cedar Hollow Stay burned into it by hand. When Evan booked the place online, the photos looked quiet and rustic. A front porch with a swing, a wide view of the hills, and a small note in the listing description that read, "Breakfast biscuits left daily on the porch table. Enjoy your stay." That had sounded charming, almost old-fashioned. The listing had no host photo, no reviews newer than 2016, and no recent replies to questions. But the price was good, and Evan was only staying for a week to finish his manuscript in peace, so he didn't think much about it. He arrived just before sunset. The road in was narrow and wound through thick cedar, the kind that crowd close and scrape the sides of your car. The air smelled like dust and sap, and the last orange of daylight burned between the trunks as he pulled up to the porch. The house looked older than the pictures. The paint on the siding had peeled away, revealing gray wood beneath. The swing creaked slightly even though there was no wind. Still, the key code on the lockbox worked, and when he stepped inside, the cabin smelled faintly of lavender and something sweet, like baking. The interior was cozy, old pine floors, an iron stove, shelves stacked with books and jars. On the table sat a note written in looping cursive, "Welcome to Cedar Hollow. Make yourself at home. Fresh biscuits on the porch each morning. Please leave the door unlocked before noon." No signature. Evan smiled, thinking it must be part of the charm. He unpacked, started a fire, and spent the night working at the little desk by the window. Around midnight, he heard something, light footsteps on the porch boards. Maybe a raccoon, he thought, but the sound paused right by the door and then faded away. He went to look, but the porch was empty and the woods were still. The next morning, when he opened the door, a small plate of golden biscuits sat neatly on the porch table, still warm, a wisp of steam curling into the cool air. He looked around for someone, maybe an old caretaker, but there was no truck, no footprints in the dirt. He picked one up, broke it in half, and it was fresh, soft, buttery, just right. He ate them with coffee, thinking it was the best start to a morning he'd had in months. On the second night, he worked late again. The house grew quiet after midnight, the kind of quiet that makes you aware of your own breathing. The wind whispered through the cedar trees and the branches brushed against the windows. He heard the porch boards creak again, a slow, deliberate sound. He turned off his laptop and listened. 3 steps, then another. He waited by the door, heart beating faster. The sound stopped. He waited a long time before finally opening the door, but there was nothing there, only the night and the faint scent of baked bread. The next morning, another plate of biscuits. Still warm. Curiosity started to dig at him. He checked the property listing again, but the contact info was blank, and when he searched the owner's name, he found an obituary from 2016. Martha D. Whitlock, beloved host of Cedar Hollow, passed peacefully in her sleep. It felt like a punch. He reread it twice, then looked back at the note on the table inside. The handwriting looked old, almost the same as the one from the obituary photo, a graceful script with wide loops. He told himself there had to be a neighbor helping keep the place running, maybe a family member still managing it. But he couldn't shake the feeling that someone or something was still around, keeping to the old routine. That night he decided to stay up and watch. He left the lights low and the curtains slightly open. Around 1 a.m. the sound came again, the soft tread of feet on the porch. He could see a shadow through the thin curtain, a faint outline moving past the window. It stopped at the table. He leaned closer, trying to see, but the glass reflected too much. He opened the door slowly, the hinges creaking. The porch was empty, yet the smell of baking filled the air, flour, butter, and something faintly metallic beneath it. The plate was already there, covered with a folded napkin. He touched it. The biscuits were hot, as if just out of an oven. His skin prickled. He backed inside and locked the door, even though the note had said not to. He didn't sleep much that night. The next morning, when he stepped outside, there were no birds, no wind. The woods felt heavy, like sound itself was being held down. The plate was gone, but the napkin remained, folded neatly, and this time a small note lay underneath. The same handwriting. The door must stay open. Evan stood there staring at it, unsure whether to laugh or feel sick. He went back inside and spent the day trying to work, but his focus was gone. He checked the pantry, the closets, even under the porch. No sign anyone had been there. The only door without a key was the cellar, sealed with a rusted latch that wouldn't move. By evening, he convinced himself he was overreacting, that some caretaker had left the note earlier, maybe annoyed that he'd locked up. He left the door open that night just to see. Around midnight, the floorboards creaked. Not on the porch this time, but inside. He froze. The footsteps were slow, almost cautious, padding across the living room. He sat in the dark, heart pounding, trying to decide whether to call out. A faint hum drifted from the kitchen, an old woman's voice, tuneless, humming softly to herself. Then the scent came again, stronger, like biscuits baking in an unseen oven. He stood and whispered, "Who's there?" The humming stopped. Silence stretched so long it seemed endless. Then the sound of a plate being set down. A quiet clink. When he turned on the light, the kitchen was empty, but on the table sat another plate, the biscuits steaming gently. He packed his things at dawn. He didn't eat the biscuits this time. He carried his bags out to the car, but when he turned to look back at the porch, a figure stood there. She was frail, gray hair pinned back, wearing an old blue dress, the same one from the obituary photo. She smiled faintly, raising a hand as if to wave him back inside. For a second, he almost did. Then he blinked and she was gone. He drove until he found cell service and called the sheriff's office in town. When he mentioned the name Cedar Hollow, the deputy went quiet, then said, "Son, that property's been empty for years. Ain't nobody listed it since Miss Whitlock passed. You sure you stayed there?" Evan didn't answer. He just hung up and kept driving, the road stretching endless under the morning sun. Later, when he looked through his phone photos, he saw something strange. Every picture of the porch table, every shot he'd taken of the biscuits, showed the same faint shape reflected in the window behind. A woman's silhouette, standing exactly where the stove would be inside. A week after he left, another traveler booked Cedar Hollow stay. The listing was still up, still showing the same photos, still promising breakfast biscuits each morning. The new guest left a review that appeared briefly before vanishing into blank text. Warm biscuits, quiet nights, and the kindest host you'll never see. When the company emailed me about the smart cabin experience in Palo Pinto County, I thought it sounded like a perfect way to unwind. I'd been working from home for months, barely sleeping, drowning in video calls and late-night deadlines. The cabin promised total solitude, scenic views of Lake Palo Pinto, and every modern convenience controlled by voice or touch. It was a weekend experiment in comfort and automation, or so the brochure said. The place was sleek from the outside, a single-story wooden structure perched on a low ridge. It had motion lights that flicked on as I pulled into the gravel driveway, and a soft female voice greeted me from the intercom by the door. "Welcome, Mr. Harris. Please confirm your check-in." I laughed at the politeness of it. "Check-in confirmed," I said. The locks clicked open with a mechanical sigh, and the lights inside brightened automatically. The living room was warm and clean, its furniture minimalist but cozy, the scent of cedar and ozone filling the air. A tablet sat on the kitchen counter glowing softly. It displayed a map of the property, the temperature, and a list of connected features: lighting, thermostat, intercom, even window shades. I thought it was overkill for a weekend stay, but the novelty was part of the charm. The first few hours were quiet. I cooked dinner, streamed some music from the built-in sound system, and let myself enjoy the stillness. There was no phone signal out there, but the Wi-Fi was fast enough for everything I needed. Around 11, I went to brush my teeth and caught a strange echo from the intercom speaker near the bathroom door, a soft static hum. I ignored it at first, assuming it was just feedback from the house's sound system. But when I opened the door, the static cut off abruptly, like someone had been waiting for me to enter. That was when I first heard her voice. "Don't go to the bathroom yet," she whispered. I froze. The voice was faint but clear, distinctly female, and it came directly from the wall-mounted intercom unit. I stood there for a few seconds, waiting for more, but the cabin was silent again. I checked the tablet to see if there was some kind of alert or system glitch, but there was nothing out of the ordinary. I walked back to the intercom, pressed the button, and said, "Who's there?" No response. I convinced myself it had to be some kind of interference. Maybe another property nearby with a similar system. My rational brain told me that was the only explanation, though the nearest cabin was miles away. I shook it off, brushed my teeth, and went to bed. At 2:17 a.m., the voice came back. This time it woke me. "Please don't go to the bathroom," she said again, her voice trembling slightly as if pleading. My first instinct was anger. I thought someone had hacked the system or was playing some prank through the Wi-Fi network. I grabbed my phone, but of course there was no service. The Wi-Fi was still on, but when I checked the tablet, the screen showed an error message: "Connection lost." I got up and turned on the lights manually. Every light in the house flickered to life except in the hallway leading to the bathroom. That strip remained dark, though I could hear a soft electrical buzz from the walls. The intercom light was glowing red. I walked closer and pressed the talk button again. If this is a joke, it's not funny. "Who are you?" There was a pause, then the faintest sound of breathing. "She's in there," the voice whispered. "Please don't open the door." The breath hitched like whoever was speaking was crying silently. Then the intercom clicked off. I stood frozen in that hallway, staring at the closed bathroom door. A soft dripping sound came from inside. The pipes, I thought. The cabin was probably old underneath all that tech. But something about the tone of that voice, it wasn't robotic. It wasn't synthetic at all. I didn't open the door. Not that night. Morning brought a brittle calm. The connection restored itself, and the tablet acted like nothing had happened. I tried to contact the company, but couldn't get through to anyone. I spent the day hiking near the lake, trying to forget about the voice. By late afternoon, I'd convinced myself I'd dreamed it. That illusion lasted until sundown when I went to take a shower. As soon as I turned the bathroom handle, the tablet on the counter lit up by itself and displayed a live feed of the bathroom door. I hadn't set up any security cameras, and there were no visible lenses, yet there it was. A dim image of the door from somewhere behind me. I backed away slowly. The intercom crackled again. "She comes through the mirror," the woman whispered. I grabbed the tablet and shouted, "Who are you?" "What the hell do you mean?" Static filled the speakers. Then, through the white noise, a shape flickered on the tablet's screen. A silhouette standing behind the bathroom mirror, just visible through the reflection. I dropped the tablet. It hit the floor and went black. I didn't shower that night. Around midnight, the power surged, lights flickering on and off in rhythmic pulses. I heard footsteps pacing from room to room, slow, deliberate steps that pressed softly against the wooden floors. The motion lights outside the cabin blinked erratically, picking up movement I couldn't see. I locked the bedroom door, though it was mostly symbolic. Everything in that cabin could be overridden remotely. I sat on the edge of the bed and listened. The footsteps stopped. Then came a faint knock from the bathroom wall. Not the door, the wall itself. 3 knocks evenly spaced, then silence. I didn't sleep. I watched the first light of dawn spill through the blinds, and for the first time I seriously considered leaving. But the car wouldn't start. When I turned the key, the dashboard screen lit up with a message I'd never seen before. System update in progress. I don't know how that could even happen. The tablet in the cabin rebooted itself soon after. The company logo flashed briefly, then the screen filled with text. Do not use the bathroom. The same message repeated 3 times. I called out again, asking who was sending this, but the only response was the faint hum of the air system. Then beneath that, the same woman's voice returned, and weak now, almost gone. She watches through the pipes. If you open it, she'll know you're here. Her voice faded into static. That was the last coherent thing I heard through the intercom. By evening, a heavy rain rolled in, rattling the windows. I sat in the living room with every light on. Around 10, the bathroom door creaked open on its own. I saw it from the corner of my eye. Just an inch, but enough to show the edge of the mirror inside. There was movement in the glass, like shadows sliding underwater. I grabbed my bag and backed toward the front door, but the door lock blinked red. The voice system came to life again. Only this time it wasn't the woman. It was something lower, slower, a distorted whisper that made the intercom vibrate. Why didn't you listen? It said. The lights dimmed one by one, starting from the living room and moving down the hall toward me. I ran to the front door, slammed the unlock button on the tablet, but it wouldn't respond. The bathroom door opened wider. Through the dark reflection, I saw her, a figure standing just inside the bathroom mirror, pale, expressionless, her head tilted as though studying me. Water dripped down her face in long, steady trails. She stepped closer to the glass, and with each step the sound of dripping grew louder, heavier until it was all I could hear. Then she reached forward and the glass rippled. I turned and ran through the kitchen, smashing through the screen door at the back. I didn't stop until I reached the tree line. When I looked back, every window in the cabin was glowing faintly blue as though lit from inside by the reflection of water. By morning, I was walking down the dirt road toward the highway, soaked and shaking. A passing truck picked me up and dropped me in Mineral Wells. When I called the rental company, they told me there was no record of my stay. No smart cabin listed under that address. The location, they said, had been condemned 3 years ago after a house fire killed a family of 3. The fire had started in the bathroom. They sent me a follow-up email later that day apologizing for any confusion. Attached was a blurry photo of the property taken after the fire. A charred shell with nothing standing but a section of the bathroom wall. Right in the center of it, faintly visible through the soot, was the outline of an intercom speaker. And when I zoomed in, I could just make out a single message burned into the melted plastic below it. Don't go to the bathroom yet. When Peter Darnell bought the little bed and breakfast on the edge of Fredericksburg, he thought he was buying quiet. The listing called it the Pecan Hollow Inn, a whitewashed 2-story farmhouse that had once served as a boarding house for railroad workers. He'd been an IT consultant for 15 years in Austin, tired of apartment life and screen glare, and decided to try something simpler. By summer, he had restored the porch swing, replaced the tin roof, and installed a sleek check-in system, a tablet on the counter, complete with digital guest log and automated room codes. The town was small enough that every guest felt like an event, and Peter liked seeing their names populate the list. He read through it some nights with coffee, feeling oddly proud of every entry, proof that the place was breathing again. The list was tidy, arranged by date, with each guest numbered automatically by the system. He had 21 so far when the first strange thing happened. One evening, while closing up, he noticed the tablet blinking softly, its screen on but dim. The guest log was open. The newest reservation, 22, was a woman named Marla Trent, checking in that night. He didn't remember seeing her booking come through. He shrugged it off, figuring the site had updated late. He waited up for her until midnight, porch light burning over the gravel drive, but no one came. By morning, the entry was gone. The number skipped to number 23, a couple from San Angelo. He assumed it was a glitch. Still, it bothered him. The air in the house felt heavier that day, like humidity pressing down, and he kept glancing at the door as if someone were about to walk in. Weeks passed. Business stayed steady. He got good reviews. He liked the rhythm of it, changing linens, baking biscuits, chatting with guests about hill country wineries and deer sightings. The tablet had become his quiet companion. Every night after checkout, he scrolled through the past entries, names, faces, hometowns. Each one meant another week the mortgage would be paid. Then one humid September night, while balancing the books, he noticed something that made him freeze. His own name sat in the list. Guest number 47, Peter Darnell. He frowned, certain he'd misread it. But there it was, right below the last guest's name. The check-in time was that very evening, 9:17 p.m. The email address was his own. The room assigned, room 3, the Magnolia Suite, was empty. At first he laughed. Some kind of test entry from the booking system, maybe? A self-diagnostic? But the timestamp matched exactly when he'd been outside watering the flower beds. He stared at the log for a long time, trying to make sense of it. When he refreshed the page, the entry was still there. He deleted it, heart thudding, then restarted the tablet. When it came back on, the name had returned. Guest number 47, Peter Darnell. Same time. Same room, same everything. He checked the other names, scrolling up and down. That's when he saw it again. Earlier, buried at number 12. Guest number 12, Peter Darnell. Different date, June 5th, 3 days after he'd moved in. He sat very still. June 5th was the night he'd spent his first evening here, alone in the house before opening officially. That night he'd slept in room 3 because the mattress in his own room upstairs was still wrapped in plastic. He remembered waking once to the faint creak of footsteps in the hallway, thinking it was the house settling. He went to the room now, flashlight in hand. Magnolia Suite smelled faintly of lavender detergent and old wood. The bed was made, corners crisp. The lamp by the nightstand was on, though he was sure he'd turned it off earlier. He stared at it, then unplugged it completely. When he went to leave, the door clicked shut behind him. Not hard, just a soft pull as if from a draft. The next morning, the tablet showed the same entry, but now the status had changed. Checked in. Peter tried contacting the booking platform's tech support, explaining the duplicate listing. The representative was polite but confused. "Sir, I see only one profile under your property, and you're listed as the owner. No guest account with that name. But it's in my log," Peter insisted. "Twice. Sometimes cached data from demo modes can appear that way," the rep offered. "Try a full system reset." He did. It didn't help. Every time he wiped it, the name returned. Then on the third night after it appeared, a new notification pinged. Guest number 47 has requested a key reset. He stood behind the counter, staring at the alert. The system only sent that if someone physically tapped the request on the room's keypad outside. He grabbed a flashlight and hurried down the hall. The Magnolia Suite door was closed. The red light on the keypad blinked steadily. He pressed his ear to the wood. Nothing. He typed in the override code and opened it. The room was empty, sheets untouched, air still. He walked in slowly, scanning every corner. Then he saw it, the bathroom light was on. The door was half open. "Hello?" He called, voice trembling. No answer. He stepped closer. The mirror over the sink was fogged as if someone had just taken a shower, though the air wasn't hot. In the condensation, words had been drawn with a fingertip. "Welcome back." Peter stumbled out and slammed the door. He slept that night in his truck, parked by the road, the inn glowing faintly in his rearview mirror. By dawn, he forced himself back inside. The mirror was clear. The tablet still showed guest number 47 as checked in. But now there was a small update. Checkout scheduled, pending. He didn't understand what that meant. No other guest record had that note. He unplugged the tablet completely and locked it in the office. He told himself he'd call an electrician, maybe even sell the place. But that evening, as the sun fell behind the pecan trees, he saw movement through the Magnolia Suite window. The curtains shifted slightly, just enough to catch the dying light. He froze on the porch. There was someone standing inside. a tall, thin figure facing the bed. The silhouette didn't move. He called out, but no response came. When he stepped closer, the figure tilted its head slowly toward the glass. The porch light flickered once, twice, and went out. He bolted back inside, grabbed the tablet, and turned it on despite himself. The log blinked awake, lines of guest names scrolling smoothly until it landed on the bottom. Guest number 47 checked out. For a second, he exhaled in relief. Then a new line appeared beneath it. Guest number 48, Peter Darnell. And the timestamp read, 7:41 p.m., the exact moment he'd stepped onto the porch. He stood staring at the screen, the reflection of his own face ghosted in the glass. In the background, behind his mirrored image, something moved, just a flicker near the hallway door. When he turned, the air was colder, as if the whole house had drawn a single breath. He called out again, and the only sound that answered was the quiet chime of the check-in notification, soft and final, as the tablet refreshed itself and the entry turned green. Somewhere down the hall, the Magnolia Suite door closed gently. Then the light under it went dark. It started with the sound of water where there shouldn't have been any. A low, steady groan like an old man forcing a secret out of his lungs. Ethan heard it his first night at the cabin sometime after midnight, when the air had gone still and the cicadas had quieted. The cabin sat near Wimberley Creek, though the listing had called it Creekside a little generously. The creek itself was a good 50 yards away, down a slope of limestone and mesquite, little more than a silver thread cutting through the darkness. He'd rented the place for a quiet weekend, some solitude away from Austin, a chance to finish grading papers and maybe reset his head after the breakup. The host, a woman named Meredith, had messaged him a code for the key box and a warning that the old water pump outside sometimes made noise when the pressure was low. But when he'd filled the kettle earlier that evening, the faucet had coughed once and then gone completely dry. That groaning sound came again, deep and wet, pulsing from under the floorboards this time, directly beneath the small kitchenette. Ethan turned off the lamp. The glow of the digital clock on the counter said 12:47. He stood there listening, trying to place the rhythm. It wasn't the hum of a pipe or the squeak of old plumbing. It was organic, almost breathing. He knelt and put his hand to the wooden floor. The boards were cool, but he could feel a faint vibration traveling through them, like something shifting slowly in the soil. He flicked on his phone light and crossed to the back door, stepping out onto the porch where the old pump sat half buried in weeds beside a rusted washtub. The night smelled of cedar and creek silt. Crickets had started up again, and somewhere in the trees a whippoorwill cried. The pump stood silent, its handle frozen upright, the metal caked in orange rust. He shone the light into the basin, dry. Even the air around it felt brittle. He went back inside, chalking it up to the sounds of an old cabin settling in the cool night. But the noise returned around 2 a.m., louder this time. It came in waves, long, dragging groans that made the glasses in the cupboard tremble. He tried turning on the sink again. Nothing but air. When he crouched to check the cabinet beneath, a faint smell of mildew wafted up, something damp and earthy. He could swear he saw moisture glinting in the dark, like a wet patch that vanished as soon as he blinked. He stuffed a towel against the crack in the cabinet door and went back to bed, telling himself it would be daylight soon. In the morning, he found the towel soaked through. Outside, the pump was still bone dry. He texted Meredith to ask if there was a well system or something that might cause pressure noises. She replied a few hours later. The pump hasn't been functional for years. Try not to worry about it. The last few guests mentioned hearing it too. That phrasing stuck with him. The last few guests mentioned hearing it too, as if it were an inside joke she didn't want to explain. He started to feel uneasy about being alone out there, miles from the nearest neighbor. The nearest town was a 10-minute drive, and his cell signal flickered between one bar and none. Still, he decided to stay. He told himself he wouldn't let a little noise ruin his weekend. That night, the groaning came back with a new sound beneath it, a slow dripping as though something was leaking steadily into a hollow space below him. He followed it to the corner near the fridge. When he pressed his ear to the wall, he heard what could only be described as whispering water, a trickle winding through unseen pipes. But when he stepped outside again, the pump was dry, the ground cracked and dust pale. He noticed something odd, though, a faint wet mark on the dirt, like something had seeped up instead of down. The patch was shaped almost like a footprint. Not boot tread, not bare either. Just a warped, human-like impression that disappeared into the weeds toward the creek. Ethan spent the next day trying to distract himself. He drove into Wimberley proper, bought coffee, wandered a few antique shops. The town had that hill country charm. Shuttered windows, live oaks shading the road, lazy dogs lying in driveways. Everyone seemed friendly enough, though when he mentioned where he was staying, an older man at the gas station paused mid-sentence. "The cabin near the creek, Ben?" he asked, then just shook his head and muttered something about the floods back in '98. Ethan didn't ask. He didn't want to seem like a tourist chasing ghost stories. That evening, a storm rolled in, the kind that sweeps through the hill country without warning. Gusting winds, low thunder rolling like barrels down the valley. Rain hammered the tin roof and the old boards creaked as if the cabin itself were trying to shrink away from the wind. Around midnight, as he was brushing his teeth, the sound returned, the groaning louder than before, now with a rhythmic sucking noise underneath it. It rose and fell like a heartbeat. He leaned over the sink and saw droplets trembling on the porcelain, even though the faucet was still dry. He crouched to open the cabinet, and what he saw made him jerk back so hard he hit his head on the counter. The towel he'd left there was gone. In its place, the wood beneath was swollen and dark, bulging slightly upward as though something beneath it was pushing against it. For a brief second, he thought he saw fingers press from underneath, 5 pale ridges rising against the soaked grain before sinking again into silence. He stumbled backward, heart pounding, and grabbed his phone. No signal. The rain roared against the windows, drowning out everything but that deep, wet groaning below the floor. He pulled a chair to the middle of the room and sat, waiting for dawn, eyes fixed on that spot under the sink. Every few minutes, the sound would shift locations beneath the bed, then under the doorway, as if whatever was making it was crawling slowly through the ground, tracing his movements. He dozed off sometime near morning, still in the chair, the rain finally easing to a drizzle. When he woke, the air felt thick and heavy. The floorboards were damp. He packed his things quickly, deciding he'd had enough. As he lifted his duffel, he noticed something carved into the underside of the table. A line of words etched into the wood, faint but deliberate. "Do not dig," that was all. He froze, reading it twice, 3 times before grabbing his keys and heading for the door. He reached the truck and tossed his bag inside, but when he turned the ignition, nothing happened. The battery was dead. He could still hear the soft creak of the windmill pump behind the cabin, though he hadn't touched it. He stepped out and saw that the weeds around it were flattened, slick with moisture. The dirt beneath had gone dark again, as if something had been dragging through it. He backed away slowly, walking until his boots found the gravel of the main road and kept going until he reached a cell signal. When he finally got through to Meredith, she sounded unsurprised. "Sometimes it acts up after heavy rain," she said. He told her about the sounds, about the floor, about the words carved into the table. There was a pause on the line. Then she said quietly, "Please don't go back inside. I'll send someone to check it." He waited by the roadside for nearly an hour until a man in an old F-150 pulled up. He introduced himself as Joe, said he handled maintenance for the property. Ethan pointed him toward the cabin, but Joe frowned. "That place got condemned after the flood," he said. "Ain't supposed to be listed anymore. The well collapsed back then. They never found the old owner." Ethan stared at him, words failing to form. "But I was just there," he said finally. Joe nodded slowly, like he'd heard that before. "Yeah," he said. "You and a few others." He turned the truck around and started up the dirt path toward the trees. Ethan never saw him again. When he checked the listing later that night, it had vanished from the rental site completely, as if it had never existed. Sometimes, when he drives through the hill country now, he thinks he hears it again. The low, steady groan of a pump, forcing water through dry ground. But it's not coming from the fields or the creek. It's somewhere beneath him, deep under the limestone, where things that should have stayed buried are still trying to breathe. I always told myself I was just cleaning up other people's weekends. I made a decent living driving the hill country triangle between Wimberley, Blanco, and Dripping Springs, moving in after the bachelorette parties and family stays and silent couples who wanted the cedar and the sky. Towels went into heavy black bags, surfaces got a citrus spray, floors got my long-handled mop and a bucket of hot water that turned as gray as creek runoff by the second room. It was honest work. I liked the way a place looked after I was done with it, like I'd ironed a wrinkle out of the world. The cabin on Leo's property was different. It sat on a lot off a narrow road that split from Ranch Road 12 and curved down toward Onion Creek. There was a sign with a carved crescent moon and the name Cedar Palms, though there were no palms, only juniper and live oak. The cabin was limestone and tin roof, a screened porch, a hanging rope swing with fraying fibers that brushed the boards. Out back, the ground sloped to a dry gully stacked with pale rocks. The first time I cleaned it, Leo met me in the driveway with a paper cup of gas station coffee and a hand that swallowed mine whole. Guests were always in and out, he said. He kept it booked year-round. It had a private feel. He asked if I could give it extra care. I told him I could, though the rate would be a little higher this far out. He waved that off, keys jingling in his pocket, eyes squinting like he was looking through me at the cabin even though it was right there. He told me the code to the lockbox and a list of requests. Be meticulous, he said. Wipe under the toaster. He had had a complaint once about crumbs. He had a tight smile when he said it. The first weekend was just beer rings, a smear of lipstick on a wine glass, a lost hair tie looped around a faucet. I worked my way from the bathroom to the kitchen to the little living room. The floors were long planks stained a color called sable by the manufacturer, a warm brown that caught light like the inside of a pecan shell. There was one corner in the living room, back left by the bookshelf and the wood stove, where the stain seemed darker. The wood there felt different under my mop, almost sticky, like humidity had set in only in that spot. I thought someone had spilled a drink and it had pooled. I scrubbed until the water went from gray to tea to a faint red that made me angry, because I pride myself on keeping my water clean as long as I can. Eventually it ran clear again. The wood dried even, the corner matched the rest, and I locked up with the code and told Leo it was ready. The second weekend I came back, I smelled it before I saw it. Iron. I tell people I can smell iron the way some folks can smell rain, a faint blood smell you learn working in this business because noses bleed and folks nick fingers, and there's always a day-old steak wrapping left in the bottom of a trash bin. The cabin looked fine under the June sun. The sink was empty, the bed stripped, the towel stacked politely. But when I ran the mop out along those long boards, when I rounded the sofa and the lamp table and pushed into that back left corner, the head of my mop came back pink. I knelt and pressed a paper towel to the wood. It wasn't wet. There was no bead of moisture like you get with a spill. It was just the grain itself, leaching color into whatever touched it. I fetched my bucket, filled it fresh in the sink, added a cap of bleach and a squeeze of soap. I scrubbed. 10 minutes, then 20. Then finally I got up and went out to the porch for air and realized I had my hand curled into a fist like I'd just been in a fight. When I came back inside, the corner was clean and drying. I stood over it, arms folded, and watched like a cop. There was a faint line, a tide mark where the water had sat. It disappeared as it dried. I left the door open while I gathered trash, listening to cicadas and the trucks on the road taking the grade in second gear. When I swept the porch, I glanced in at the corner again. It was fine. I closed up and sent Leo a text with a photo of fresh pillows and a dumb little joke about how if he ever tired of this place, I might take over the lease. He didn't reply. He rarely replied. The third weekend, it was a darker stain, like something had been held against the wood. The smell hit me harder. I lifted the rug and there it was, geometric only because the room was, the lines of the boards dictating the shape of the mark. I scrubbed, and this time the water in my bucket went red. Not dramatic, not movie red, but like a penny held tight in a wet palm. I changed the water twice and went at it again, and the stain lifted. But as I wrung out the mop head from the last pass, I saw a dark hair caught in the cotton strands, and it took me a second to realize it wasn't mine. It was coarse and short, animal maybe, or from a man's forearm. It slid into the sink and stuck to the drain strainer, and I washed it down with the sprayer like it meant nothing. The smell faded. The corner dried. I finished up and put the rug back, but I left it angled differently. Not covering the full spot, a test I pretended wasn't a test. When I left, the daylight knifed across the floor and made that place gleam like a healed wound. By the fifth weekend, it was routine. I would walk in and the air would change. The place was hot in a way the window unit couldn't touch. The rest of the cabin smelled like cedar and glass cleaner, but that corner had its own climate. I bought a handheld moisture meter as if the problem might be something respectable like a pipe sweating under the floor. The readings were normal. I brought a bright flashlight and ran it along the boards. No swelling, no warping. I pressed my palm down and felt only the heat of my own hand bouncing back through old wood and varnish. I called Leo then. He didn't pick up. I sent him a picture that I cropped close so you couldn't see the rest of the room. He wrote back an hour later just the words, "Appreciate you." The stain waited for me on the 7th weekend. Rich and stubborn. I took my bucket to the sink, and when I turned the tap, a line of ants marched out from the baseboard by the fridge, heading toward the cupboard. I watched them until the water turned steaming. I killed them with a paper towel and flushed the towel. I told myself the ants and the stain were both nature, which is what people in the hill country say when they mean something you can't fix without tearing the world apart. On a Tuesday afternoon with no booking scheduled, I drove over without telling Leo. I hate doing that. People trust me to respect their places and their privacy. But I needed to see the floor when I wasn't on the clock, when no one had slept there in 2 nights. The cabin felt different, empty, like a shell on a beach. I closed the door behind me and stood for a full minute in the cool quiet. Then I walked straight to the corner and saw the faintest blush in the wood, barely there, like a thought. I got down on my knees and put my face close. The old boards had tiny flaws, pinholes in the finish where dust had settled when someone long ago laid the varnish on a hot day. I tapped with my knuckles and heard hollow. That made me look at the floor more as a lid than a surface. I have tools in my car for things I'm not supposed to have tools for. You clean long enough and you collect. A putty knife, a pry bar, a box of screws left behind by a handyman who drank 2 Gatorades and never came back. I slid the putty knife under the quarter round at the baseboard and felt nails give. I worked gently. I didn't want to leave a trace. The baseboard came loose and I laid it against the wall like a bone. Then I found the seam of one long board and eased the pry bar under it until I felt the nail heads rake against the grain and give with tiny pops like knuckles. The board lifted. Hot air rose from the gap like a gasp. Under the floor there was a crawl space of a few inches, no more, a strip of darkness between the neat boards and the rougher planks beneath. The smell of iron was a wall. I leaned away and breathed through my mouth until my eyes stopped watering. Then I aimed my flashlight into the slot and saw a strip of old newspaper folded tight along the joist, brown and crisp. I saw a little pile that could have been dirt or could have been something else. I saw a glint pick up my light and throw it back like a cat's eye. I couldn't get my hand down. The gap was too small. I slid the board further. Nails squealed. Then I saw the edge of a tin lid, the old kind with a key wound into it, the kind my grandmother used to open condensed milk. I stopped because I heard a car on the road. Sound travels strange out there. It could have been right outside or a mile away. I pressed the board back into place with the heel of my hand, tapped the nails in with the pry bar handle like a hammer, set the baseboard back and stood looking at the corner while I counted to 60. Then I opened the door. The porch was empty. A wind had come up from the creek bed carrying the dry rustle of juniper berries. The road shimmered through heat. No car. That night I dreamed about mopping a floor that mopped me back, that took the water and flung it up like rain, that painted my shoes red and made prints wherever I stepped. I woke at 3 to the sound of my phone buzzing on the kitchen counter. A booking for the weekend. Cedar Palms. Leo thanked me in advance and added an address for his other property in case I wanted more work. I stared at the screen until the letters swam. Friday, the guests came. They left a cooler on the porch and a sweater on a chair and their scent in the little bathroom. Saturday afternoon, I waited until the checkout message hit my phone, and then I drove over with my bucket and handled the place like it had insulted me personally. The corner bloomed as if something in the boards drew up from below, a plant finding water. I scrubbed and it receded. I lifted the board again. This time I had a plan. I had a pair of tongs from my kitchen, and a strip of duct tape around my wrist and a headlamp I used for changing a tire at night once on Highway 281. I slid the board, and the smell struck so hard my eyes watered again. I reached down and caught the tin lid with the tongs. It came up with a wet sucking sound. My hand shook. The lid was painted with a brand name no one sells anymore. Under it was the mouth of a jar buried flush with the subfloor. The jar was clear glass gone cloudy. Inside was something that moved in the light, and I dropped it back because the sound I made wasn't a sound I knew I could make. Left the cabin with the jar under my shirt because that made as much sense as anything. I put it in the trunk of my car and drove to the low bridge over the creek where local kids throw beer bottles when they want the sound of shattering without the cleanup. I sat with the trunk open and looked at the jar like it might answer. Inside, floating, there was cloth and something like paper and dark clots that could have been dirt. The water was the color of weak tea. I opened it and the smell came out in a rush that bent me. I gagged until I saw stars and set the jar on the concrete and tipped it into the creek. The water carried anything that left the mouth down and around a bend where the rocks were slick with algae. The jar itself rolled twice and lodged in a crack like it wanted to stay. I put the lid back on and kicked it into deeper water. Then I washed my hands with a half bottle of drinking water and scrubbed my palms until the skin felt scorched. I told myself I had done a good thing. I told myself it was a relic of some old superstition, a weird little charm some previous owner had hidden, the way folks used to put coins in walls for luck. I told myself it was over. The next weekend, the corner was darker than I had ever seen it. I broke and called Leo from the doorway, one hand on the jamb like the place might move. He picked up on the third ring and gave me that long, soft hey like we were friends. I told him something was wrong. He said, "What do you mean wrong?" And I told him about the floor and the smell and the jar and the crawl space and the ants and the way the air lay heavy in there like a wet blanket you could drown under. He was quiet for too long. Then he said, "Meet me there in an hour." He hung up before I could say I was already inside. He arrived with his shoulders hunched, a man held together by a thread. He wore a cap from a feed store and the brim had a sweat line. He came in and went straight to the corner without looking at me. He stood a foot away and put his hands on his hips. He said, "You shouldn't have touched that." I said, "What was it?" And he said, "My mother." The word dropped like a tool on concrete. He didn't look at me when he said it. He said it in a way that made it both crazy and ordinary at once, like telling someone the time. I waited for him to laugh, to explain, to say she kept some hair and some Bible verses in a jar because she believed in holding on to her luck. He didn't. He said she fell here long ago and no one came for too long and the stain wouldn't lift. And my father ripped up this floor and put a new one and he still smelled it. And when we sold to the folks before me, they sealed the crawl space and told us to forget it. And you can't forget what the wood knows. He put his hand down on the spot and closed his eyes. I wanted to pull his hand away because it looked wrong there, like a hand on a hot stove. He told me he had bought the place back when he thought marriage could be saved with a project. He told me his wife left anyway, and he rented this place to people who came and took pictures and said it was rustic and charming. And he stood outside sometimes and listened to their laughter and felt like a man outside a house he used to live in. He said when a corner keeps coming back at you, you either tear out the corner or you live with it. He said I had gone and opened what his father had sealed and now it wanted air again. I don't know what version of me decided I was the person who should set something right that had been wrong for years. Maybe it was pride. Maybe it was the same thing that makes me stay late on a job to scrub one more ring out of a tub. I told him I could fix it. I told him we would pull up the boards and scrub the subfloor and lay something down and bleach it until it was clean. He said bleach wouldn't touch it. I said bleach touches everything. I told him to go get a fan and I went to my car for the pry bar and a mask like nurses wore. And we took up 3 boards and the smell came like a train through a tunnel and made me blink until tears ran down. And he stood there with his mouth set in a line like this was what he deserved. We hauled out the old newspaper and the dead insect husks and a rusted nail bent like a question mark. There was a darker mark on the rough planks beneath, the shape of a spread hand if a hand had fingers like water. I poured straight bleach on it and watched it foam and felt something in me pull tight like a rope. By the time the sun went down, we had done what we could. We set the boards back but didn't nail them. We ran the fan. The cabin sounded like a bad dream. The fan and the cicadas and the distant whine of a motorcycle on the grade. Leo sat on the hearth with his cap in his hands. He looked like a child who had stayed up too late and missed the part where sleep comes quick. He said thank you without looking at me. I told him to leave the fan running and the windows cracked. I took my bucket to the sink and the water ran rusty for a second as if the pipes themselves had learned the trick. I shut it off hard. That night I drove home with the windows down and the taste of bleach at the back of my throat. My hands smelled like coin. I washed them 3 times in my own kitchen and ate bread without butter, and sat at the table with the light off and the sound of the highway coming in over the fields like a tide. I checked my phone out of habit before bed. There was a new booking for Cedar Palms, check-in tomorrow. I started to type a message to Leo telling him to block the weekend. Before I could finish, the message bubble on my screen shifted upward. as if the phone had a hand pressing it, and the text field filled on its own. My name and a code and the words "places ready." I reached for the light and missed the switch and put my hand on the wall where the paint had a faint tack from summer humidity. My palm stuck and then let go with a whisper. In the dark, my house smelled different. A thing you notice when you've been breathing bleach all day. It smelled like dust and cumin and the laundry soap I buy because it's cheap and bright. It did not smell like iron. I slept and woke without dreams. I went back Sunday morning. The fan was still going, and the boards we had not nailed down had settled a little as if the room had exhaled in the night. I walked straight to the corner before I looked at anything else, and I didn't feel surprised to see the stain. Not faint, not coy, but full. It had taken the shape of the old mark and gone right up to the edges of the boards again, respecting the geometry of the room. I felt tired in a way that made my bones hum. I took a picture to send to Leo and then didn't send it. I got down on my knees and laid my palm on the wood the way he had. It was warm. Not hot, not fevered. Warm like a thing that had a pulse. Sometimes people ask me how to get setting stains from butcher block. They want an answer they can act on. I tell them to sand lightly with the grain and wipe with mineral oil. Sometimes they ask how to get red wine out of cotton. I say cold water, then salt, then a gentle detergent and patience. If you ask me how to get blood out of an old floor in a cabin off a hill country road, where no one will admit the truth of a night so long ago the air still remembers, I will say you can't. You can only clean what repeats. That is the job. You wipe, it returns. You scrub, it lightens, then it darkens when your back is turned. You tell yourself it is someone else's life, someone else's corner, but you carry the smell home in the lines of your hands. I still go every weekend. Leo pays on time. He doesn't joke anymore about crumbs. He nods at the driveway and asks after my car. And once he brought me tacos in a paper boat, and we ate them on the porch not looking at the door. We never talk about the jar. The fan is part of the furniture now. I've stopped lifting the board. I've stopped imagining there's a trick I haven't tried. I mop and I wring and the water turns the faintest color of copper and I change it out and keep moving. When I lock the door, the corner is clean. When I come back, it isn't. That is our contract. That is what he pays for and what I accept. If you think this is a ghost story, fine. If you think it is a story about a man who can't leave a room in his mind, fine. If you think it is a story about a woman who takes other people's mess and tries to wipe it out because it's easier than looking at her own, you might be right too. I can tell you this much. Last Sunday after I finished and the sun was gone behind the ridge and the cicadas had quieted to that thin electric sound, I stood in the doorway and watched the corner as if it might move. And in the reflection on the glass of the storm door, I saw a shape that could have been my shoulder and could have been someone else's. It was nothing you could point to. It was nothing you could show in a photograph and say, "There, do you see?" It was just a slight difference in the dark. My hand was on the knob. The air on my skin felt like breath from below the floorboards. I locked the door and walked to my car, and the gravel sounded like bones. When I got home, I put my bucket in the tub and filled it and let the water run until it overflowed the rim and spilled onto the tile and down the drain and made that tight sucking sound that tells you the pipe you cannot see is doing its job. I stood with my hands under the tap until the blood smell went. And maybe it was never there, and maybe it was in the wood, and maybe it was in me. Monday morning, I woke up and found a rust-colored print of my right hand on my kitchen counter, where I must have leaned when I came in. I got a sponge and wiped it away. 40 minutes later, the color bled back from the pores in the laminate, as if the counter remembered me. I wiped it again. It came back lighter and thinner. I wiped it again and again until it stayed gone. I opened all the windows and let the day in. Down in the creek bed behind my little house, a thin trickle worked through limestone and vanished under the road, carrying what it could carry, leaving what it had to leave. I was 3 hours west of Austin when the sky went from brass to black so fast it felt like someone had pulled a tarp across it, the kind of hill country night that closes in and starts whispering at your windows. I had planned to make it through, to Fort Stockton, but the last fill-up in Dripping Springs took longer than it should have, and then a wreck on 281 turned the highway into a string of red beads. I am not 20 anymore. My eyes burn at 1 in the morning and the white lines start to crawl. I had a list of emergency Airbnbs for nights like this, little places along farm roads with keypads and self-check-in. The one I clicked on without thinking was called Dry Creek Cabin. The photos showed clean pine walls and a little porch with a swing. The description sounded like a friend leaning in to confide the good stuff. Easy code, strong coffee, reliable Wi-Fi. Hosts live nearby if you need anything. That last line made me feel like I was stepping into a neighborhood and not a trap. I turned off at a county road that looked like a sketch of a road. The truck rode up and down the limestone humps, the tires hissing in the dust. Around me, the live oaks leaned in and the cedars pressed close, and the wind talked through them in a steady voice. Somewhere out there, a windmill creaked and kept creaking. I drove with one arm out to tap the dashcam's red light to make sure it was still recording. It was an old habit since a drunk clipped me near Sonora last year and ran. The camera had paid for itself that day. Now I keep it on even when I park. The cabin sat down a short lane with a cattle guard shivering under my weight. It was one room with a metal roof and a deck that faced a shallow gully striped with pale rock. Dry Creek. The name made sense because the creek bed looked picked clean, a bone laid out by a hawk. There was a scent when I stepped out of the truck. Not skunk and not cedar. It was the smell of rain that never quite landed, a wetness dreamed by the ground. The porch light burned a steady yellow circle where mosquitoes worked their shift. I killed the engine and the night sound rushed in. Cicadas, tree frogs, that windmill again. Under it all there was another sound I couldn't place, a thin metallic clicking that came and went like a loose ring on a hook. I shrugged it off because I'd been alone a long time, and when you are alone you collect noises like a sweater collects burrs. I left the dash cam on the mount because I was charging it from a power bank in the console, and I told myself I would pull the footage in the morning. I noticed, just as I grabbed my bag, that the angle of the camera faced the cabin and the front window. Pure chance. I keyed in the code and listened to the lock breathe. The door was stubborn and then gave in with a groan that felt rehearsed. Inside, the cabin was exactly what the photos had promised, and exactly not. The bed was made with crisp sheets, but one corner had been tucked twice in the rush to get it perfect. The coffee beans were sealed in a mason jar, and the jar's rim had a fine ring of coffee dust around it that was smooth except where a finger had traced a quick half moon. A local guidebook lay open to a page about swimming holes, and in the margin someone had penciled a note that read, "Ask about the creek before dark." The room smelled like pine sol and something under the pine sol that the cleaning couldn't reach. My phone showed 1 bar if I stood near the window and leaned my head toward it like a plant. The host had texted earlier with a welcome and the code and a friendly warning about deer sleeping on the drive. I wrote back a thanks, a thumbs up, and asked about breakfast spots in Junction. There was no answer. I showered, listening to the pipes gasp, and laid out my shirt to dry on the back of a chair. The wind pushed the trees and the metal roof pinged. The clicking sound came again, a series of quick contacts spaced just enough apart to make you wait for the next one. The cabin had a small window to the right of the bed that looked out at the porch, and beyond that the dark creek bed and the darker line of the oaks. The blinds were raised halfway. I debated pulling them down. I told myself I liked waking to the light. I lay in bed with my phone face down and my keys on top of it. I have a little ritual when I sleep in unfamiliar places. Shoes at the foot of the bed in the direction I'd run. Truck keys where I can grab them. A memory of exits the way you map fire escapes without admitting you're doing it. I leave a lamp on low. I do not check the closets. I don't need to hand the night a prop. The last thing I saw was the red light on the dash cam under the shade of the windshield. An insect eye peering toward the window. The dreams came slow and jagged. A walkway that shifted under me like a cattle guard. A woman standing in knees-high grass with her hair plastered to her skull and her eyes white as hailstones. The smell of damp earth pushing up through floorboards. When I surfaced, it was to the sense that someone had passed through the room and left the door ajar in my mind. The lamp was still on. The door was closed. The blinds were as I left them. The sound outside had changed, and I believed for a second that it had actually started to rain. A fine, hard Texas rain that hits the ground and bounces. Then I understood the sound was on the glass. I propped myself up and looked at the window. No water. No drops. The sound stopped. The silence after it had shape, like a held breath. My heart knocked. I counted to 20 and my cheeks flushed hot, then cooled. I told myself, this is rural. This is an animal, this is a branch, this is nothing. The next morning I woke to light like skim milk and a bruise of a sunrise and the aftershave smell of cedar dust. The creek outside was unchanged, a pale bone on red dirt. I made coffee and stepped onto the porch and felt a weight behind my eyes as if I had stared too long. The air had that after-rain quality again, all sparkle and promise without a wet patch in sight. My truck sat 10 feet away and the dash cam was still confessing its red light. I saw myself in the window of the cabin as a dim figure holding a mug. Something about the reflection was wrong in a lazy way, like a shirt that fits until you notice the seam is off. I shook it away and went to the truck and stopped the recording. The app leaped to life and the thumbnails slid by with their little green timestamps. I scrolled to the overnight and hit play. The video breathed into night mode, washed white and silver, the cabin window a rectangle of faint amber in the frame. Moths threw themselves into the porch light like soft bullets. The trees shifted. For a long time, nothing happened. Then the blinds stirred. Not from wind, but from a hand below the sill. The movement was precise. An inch up, then 2, then 3, then a pause long enough for my brain to whistle and recoil. The blinds rose high enough to show the lower edge of the window, just the thickness of the sill and the dark beyond. At 2:11, a shape moved into place in the window, like a ghost choosing to become a drawing. It was a face. It was at the exact height of mine when I stood. The night vision made it part negative and part X-ray. No dramatic features, a hairline, a brow, the bright plates of eyes that didn't blink. The face did not press to the glass. It hovered with the exact patience of someone who knows they have already been noticed. It looked in. The timestamp kept incrementing. 2 minutes, 5, 13. The eyes never closed. A moth hit the glass near the mouth and fell away. At 3:06, my sleeping shape came into view in the reflection of the window, a pale form turning toward the wall, and the face outside adjusted its angle to keep me within its sight line. I felt cold in the lungs and my hands went slick. I scrubbed forward in 10-minute jumps. The face never moved away. At 4:39, it tilted like a bird to listen. The lamp inside flickered. The blinds edged down by a single slat and then returned to where they had been, as if whatever had raised them had changed its mind. Dawn came, and with it the face became less distinct, until it was only a suggestion behind the glass and then vapor. I sat there with the truck door open and mosquitoes gnawing at my ankles, and watched it again and again with the stubborn part of my brain dictating rational explanations while the animal part paced. When I could think in a straight line, I hit upload to back up the clip. The progress bar started across with its cheerful promise and then froze. The app blinked a message that said, "Connection unstable, retrying," then switched to uploaded and showed me nothing. The thumbnail was a gray square. I tried again. The bar went across and the clipping posted to a cloud folder with a timestamp and a size. When I tapped it, the file was 33 seconds of static. I cursed the valley and the one bar. I drove toward junction until the signal steadied and tried again. Uploaded. Empty. I told myself the file had corrupted in the handoff. I told myself it happens. I told myself to go back to the cabin and pack up and leave. I went back because there was nowhere else to go. Inside, the room seemed wrong in the way a face seems wrong when you come back from the barber. My keys were not exactly where I had left them. The lamp was a fraction of an inch turned. The blinds sat at the same height, only the crooked string had shifted to a different angle. At the window, low on the glass, there were touches of oil where fingers might have rested lightly. They were not smears. They were prints placed in a careful row like notes on a staff. I texted the host to ask if someone had come by early. The message struggled and then sent. No reply. In the guest book on the table, there was a new entry above the last entry written in a different hand than mine in a blocky schoolhouse print. It said, "Do not sleep with the window open. Do not upload anything from here, please." There was no name, no date, no room for one. I took photos of everything, because that was what my brain knew how to do. When I raised the phone to snap the window, the screen showed a face in the glass for a heartbeat where my reflection ought to have been. Not mine. close to mine as if related socially rather than biologically. The phone shutter clicked and the image that saved was only my own. I packed without finishing the coffee. On the porch, I listened a last time and the clicking sound rose again. A metal against metal tap that spaced itself like steps. I traced it to the cattle guard, the bars cooling in the morning air and popping. I almost laughed, which would have felt good, except the laugh died before it reached my throat. The smell of rain was heavy enough to taste. There were no clouds. The creek bed waited without patience. The truck started. The dashcam's red eye stared. I thought about taking the camera off the mount. I left it because I wanted the day recorded in spite of myself. I told myself to be a man with proof and not a man with a story. In Junction, I parked near the courthouse where I had bars and power and a shade tree. I uploaded the entire night folder to my laptop. The progress bars behaved like good citizens. I opened the file I had watched in the truck. The player said it was there. It had the correct length. I hit play and was rewarded with the sound of night insects and a porch light, and the view of a window and the slow scroll of the hours without interruption by a face. There was a single moment at 2:11 where the noise floor rose the way it does when the AC kicks in. Then even that flattened out. I scrubbed forward and back and let the shame and anger burn my tongue. I did not realize I had clenched my teeth until they hurt. My hand shook in a tired way. I took a photo of the laptop screen to show how the file had changed. The photo was just the laptop. In the frame, reflected in the laptop, the courthouse brick and the bleached sky in my own shape made a triptych. In the left pane of the reflection, another shape leaned in with my height and the wrong tilt to the head. I looked up fast and there were only people walking to lunch. I did what you do when a thing slips out of your hands. I took the story to someone else. The sheriff's office smelled like coffee and paper. The deputy was younger than me and had the careful expression of a person listening across a gap. He looked at the guestbook photos in the window and the fingerprints lined like notes. He asked for the address and asked if I had paid the deposit and asked if I had taken anything that wasn't mine. When I showed him the clip that had become ordinary, he took my phone and held it as if it were a small animal. He said folks sometimes thought they had proof and then the proof did not want to hold still. He said he knew the lane where the cabin sat, and that the creek there ran only in strange years. He said the owners were older and decent. He tilted the laptop squinting and a tiny smile died and left his face empty. He asked me if I had slept with the window open. I said no. He nodded like a man hearing a diagnosis confirmed. He told me to take a different route west and to stop once before dark to make sure I was steady. He did not say I was crazy. He did not say there was nothing to this. He did not put any of it in a report. When I asked why not, his eyes clicked to the side and back. He said quietly that sometimes what you write down is what sticks. I left town with my mouth dry. The road west was a white line laid across a table of hot stone, mesquite and prickly pear, the occasional windmill propped against the sky. I told myself it was over. I told myself I had slept badly and watched shadows as if they were news. The dashcam recorded my jaw working and the glare in the miles. Late afternoon brought a motel off the interstate that had probably seen 100 nights like mine. The clerk slid the key across and a photocopied list of restaurants. The room smelled like bleach and something beneath it that housekeeping could not reach. The AC ran loud. The TV offered sports without sound. I set the laptop on the small round table and pulled the files into a new folder named Plainly so my future self would not have to hunt. The dashcam chimed when I unplugged it, and its little screen showed a last thumbnail I had not noticed, a clip with a timestamp 30 minutes after I had left the cabin. I had not told it to record. The camera had no battery left to speak of. I clicked the file open. The view was of my motel room door from a height that corresponded to a man's shoulder. The image swam with compression, then settled. The door opened. I came in with my bag and my tired face and shut it and put the bolt across, and aside from the small jolt of seeing yourself when you aren't ready, there was nothing remarkable except for the fact that the camera could not have been outside my room looking in. I advanced frame by frame. The angle did not change. The camera was exactly where a person would be if they were standing 2 feet inside my door. My throat closed in a child's way. The motel AC coughed. In the video, I set the bag on the bed and walked back to the door and stood with my ear to it, because I heard something out in the gallery. I remembered that second. It had been a woman laughing 2 doors down. In the video, behind me in the glass of the TV, A figure stood at the window with its head turned slightly, patient in the same way as before. I turned in the recording to face the room, and the figure by the window stepped out of the TV reflection the way a person steps out of a coat. The dashcam screen went black and then returned with a polite error. The file length was reduced to 3 seconds. The folder where I had placed the cabin footage was empty again. I had the feeling of being observed through a keyhole shaped exactly like me. The motel curtain breathed with the AC and the cheap chain bumped its track. I did not turn the TV on. I did not turn the lights off. I sat in the chair with the laptop open and the camera in my palm and listened for that metallic clicking. I told myself to be rational, and then the rain smell arrived, full and green, a coolness that swam across the carpet even though outside the asphalt baked. The smell had weight. It filled the lungs and made thought slow. I lifted the laptop lid to use the black screen as a mirror. The window behind me was all night. My face floated there with the lamp glare across it. The pane reflected the bed, the TV, the cheap print on the wall, the space near the curtain. In that space, a second face resolved at my shoulder as if a negative were developing. It was patient. It was too close. It had a familiarity that turned in my gut. You would think you would scream, but that is not how it works. The throat becomes something you have to carry. The air around my ear cooled, and a thin sound that was not words laid itself against me. The steady contact of someone tapping a coin against glass while counting. I thought of the guestbook note telling me not to upload anything from there. I thought of the deputy who would not write. I thought of the blind cords drawn and redrawn by a careful hand. I watched the laptop's dark screen until my eyes watered, and the faces blurred, and the second one could have been a trick of reflection. Some part of me decided then that I could go on if I simply never tried to make anyone else see it. I shut the laptop gently and placed the dashcam in the drawer as if it were a delicate object. The room ballooned with silence and then collapsed back to size. I lay on the bed without undressing. I put my keys on my chest the way a child holds on to something before sleep. Before I closed my eyes, I reached over and pulled the curtain's edge tight, so the seam met the wall and the night outside had nowhere to pour in. I must have slept because I woke to the AC silent and the sound of tapping, precise and evenly spaced, coming from the window glass inches from my head. It continued until the first light traced the cheap curtain in gray lines. When I finally pulled it back, there were no drops, no coins, no marks. The parking lot looked like a stage after a play. Abandoned water bottles and a paper bag pressed to the curb. On my phone, the time was ordinary. The folders were empty. The scent of rain still hung without a single wet square in sight. I checked out with a smile I hoped looked like a smile you see every day. I drove west under a sky that could not decide if it wanted to fight or forgive. The dashcam stayed in the drawer. The road unspooled and I tried hard not to glance at the windows of my own truck, because the glass had become something I did not entirely trust. Somewhere past Ozona the wind picked up, and a single dark line moved across the far hills like a creek deciding to exist. I could have turned north and taken the long way around the world. I could have driven until the tires smoked. The truth is, I have not looked at my camera's upload screen again. The truth is, sometimes at night I will wake to a smell that makes me think of a storm arriving, and I will hear a faint counting, measured and patient, and I will keep my eyes closed because I have learned that not everything that stares through your window needs to be captured. Some things take capture personally. If you ask me what happened at Dry Creek Cabin, I will tell you the last thing I know in a way that holds still. A traveler's dashcam recorded something that stood outside his window and watched him breathe. When he tried to share it, the record became a story. Later, in a motel far from the creek, he learned the story had come along. I tell it to you now and you can believe all or none of it. But if you find yourself on a county road west of Wimberley with the sky pressing low and the metal roof pinging and the blinds raised exactly halfway, consider leaving the camera dark and the window closed. Consider that there are some places where the air smells like rain that never falls, and the last thing you need is a proof that insists on following you home.